Good morning. On behalf of Bradford Health Services, welcome to today's interactive webinar presentation entitled Recovery is for Everyone, Treating Addiction in Women, the LGBTQ+ population, and veterans. My name is Zach Ludwig. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Services and Accreditation for Bradford. I'll be moderating today's session, assisting with our chat and Q&A functions, and facilitating any questions we have time for at the end of the training. Today's session is a continuation of our quarterly training series that was initiated in 2020. If you've been joining us routinely, you will know that it's our goal to bring you timely, high-quality educational content in an accessible manner. If this is your first time joining us, I extend to you an additional recognition and welcome, and I hope that you'll continue to come back and join us for future presentations as we continue to expand our webinar offerings based largely on your feedback and requests. September is an important month in our communities, in the mental health and substance use disorder treatment communities, because this is National Suicide Prevention Awareness and National Recovery Month. Community is the key word. Each of us represents a part of a larger collective provider network. Our principal goals for us as helpers is to reduce stigma, increase access to treatment, and provide the best evidence-based care to those patients and families with whom we interact. As organizers of this presentation, we believe that we have been taking action that is informed by the principles of quality care as we work to enrich our treatment settings that are inclusive and responsive to the needs of the individuals we serve, and give those seeking recovery the best chance possible to live a long life of health and happiness. We have selected to focus on 3 groups for whom mental health and substance use disorder treatment can be challenging. These include women, LGBTQIA+ population, and the active duty service members and veteran enlisted. We have selected these groups because each population, in general terms, may experience issues with access to care, require a treatment culture that is responsive to their individual and collective needs, and for whom stigmatization represents a possible derailment to their overall mental health. In a recent study, it was reported that binge drinking among adults aged 35 to 50 is occurring at a record high rate of 30% of respondents reporting binge drinking episodes in the year 2022. The use of marijuana is more than double what we saw 10 years ago. There are significant cultural influences at play as we analyze the factors influencing different populations who are impacted by substance use and substance use disorder. Today's session will explore some of the influences we are seeing impacting the groups we treat. Before I introduce the session in more detail, I do want to share some important information with you about how the format of today's training works. You are viewing this training in the webinar format, which means that you can see the presenters, but your video and your audio are off. Please use either the chat or the Q&A functions of Zoom located at the bottom of your screen to ask questions regarding anything discussed or communicated, or in order to communicate with the presenter. At the end of the presentation, we will have time for brief discussion where questions will be received and answered if the presenter has not already addressed those questions during the course of the presentation. Please note that you will receive a post-session email that will include a link to today's presented materials and references today, as well as a link to the video recording of today's presentation. Today's session is eligible for 3 hours of continuing education credit. Bradford Health Services is providing this continuing education credit at no charge to you. Your attendance and participation today are being recorded through your login, so there's no need to put your attendance information in the chat box, though we welcome you to say hello. After the conclusion of today's presentation, you will also receive an email with a link to an evaluation. The survey link will be open for 30 days post today's concluded webinar. You must complete the evaluation in order to receive CE credit for your participation. After completing the survey, you will receive your certificate by email within 2 weeks. Late evaluation submissions after 30 days from today will not be accepted. Therefore, continuing education credit will not be awarded for this event. Make sure you complete your survey as soon as possible. If you want to complete your survey today, immediately following the event, which we recommend you do, we are going to include the CE evaluation link in the chat box towards the end of the presentation. We were expecting a large attendance in today's session, so your patience is appreciated in us processing those continuing education certificates. If we do experience any technical difficulties today, please stand by while we do our best to resolve them. If the webinar gets interrupted due to technical difficulties in any way, we will be reaching out to you with additional information via the email you used for registration. Today's training will be divided into 3 parts. In the first section, we will be discussing the treatment needs of our military service members. In the 20 years between 2001 and 2020, the suicide rate among veterans age 18 to 34 increased by 95%. Today, about 17 veterans die by suicide daily. Concurrent mental health and physical health needs are common among veterans, for whom PTSD, depression, anxiety often present along with physical health needs such as chronic pain and brain injuries such as TBI. We will be hearing from 2 co-presenters during this session. Jason Smith, he's a retired U.S. Marine Corps Master Sergeant, currently serving with Bradford Health Services as the Veteran and Military Liaison for the Southeast region. Jason served in the United States Marine Corps on active duty for 20 years and retired in August of 2015. After retirement, he completed his master's degree in human resource management from Troy University and served in the human resources field in various roles. Currently, Jason's mission is to help veterans, active and reserve service members, and their families navigate the VA process, military benefits, and break the stigma of getting people help for substance use disorder and mental health issues. Jason is also in long-term recovery and has been sober since October 17, 2017. Congratulations. Jason volunteers with several veteran 501(c) organizations and is an avid outdoorsman, veteran advocate, husband of 25 years to his spouse, Connie, and father of 2. Breanne Marshall, our second speaker for that session, is a graduate of Alabama A&M University of Huntsville with her bachelor's degree in social work in 2013 and her master's in social work in 2015. She is eligible to be licensed as an LICSW in Alabama. She works at Bradford Health Services Madison Residential Facility, where she counsels veteran patients in group and individual sessions daily. This population is near and dear to her heart because both her father and her brother served in the military. The Madison treatment model, an extended care program, is something that Bree especially enjoys working with because in this setting, she gets to see her veteran patients progress and grow during the course of their treatment in a much more evident manner than in a brief intervention setting. Bree identifies herself as very family-oriented and treasures her role as a wife and mother to a 4-year-old child. She is passionate about working in a field where she can make differences in the lives of the people she serves on a daily basis. In our second section for today, we'll be discussing the treatment of women. Women represent 50% of the United States population, but as a population, they face more barriers accessing treatment than men. This is in part due to social stigma about substance use disorder, especially in the context of pregnancy and child rearing, which often results in fear or real legal consequences that drive many women to conceal their substance use and not get help. We also know that women progress through the stages of substance use disorder differently than men. Women in general use substances in smaller amount, but experience the effects of substance use more profoundly while simultaneously developing the compulsive use patterns inherent with addiction more quickly than men, according to research. Our speaker for this section, Leah Parker, is a licensed professional counselor and has been working at Bradford for 11 years. She has worked as a primary counselor at both inpatient and outpatient settings, and she's worked in as an administrative leader role during her tenure with Bradford. She began working at a Reprieve for Women located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama in 2017, and has worked in this specialized long-term care model for women since that time. She is trained in utilization of DBT, CBT, and EMDR, and is passionate about learning and expanding her skills that help her to better serve the women for whom she works. In today's final section, we'll be discussing the treatment of LGBTQIA individuals. A recent publication from SAMHSA indicated that lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults are more likely than straight adults to use substances, experiences mental health conditions, including major depressive disorders, and experience serious thoughts of suicide. The increased mental health stressors are often driven by stigmatization, discrimination, and harassment that many individuals, including youth, continue to face in this country. Angel Rasco, our facilitator for this segment, is the clinical director and director of the Homicide Survivors Program at the Family Services Center in Huntsville, Alabama. She is an LICSW with a private independent practitioner endorsement and approved clinical supervisor for social workers in Alabama. She worked for Bradford Health Services for 5.5 years in various roles and capacities, including a progressive career as a counselor assistant to the family program, counselor, evening administrator, and assistant treatment director. She has experience working with adults, adolescents, and families who are struggling from substance use disorder. She specializes in treatment of therapy for those of the LGBTQIA plus community, including some of the specific issues that they may experience. In her role as the clinical director for the Family Services Center, she works with all ages, facilitating individual, family, and couples counseling, as well as leading conflict resolution, parenting, and sexual boundaries classes. As the director of the Homicide Survivors Program at the Family Services Center, she also coordinates the opportunity for free counseling for those who have been affected by a loved one dying by homicide. Please enjoy today's presentation, and I'm now going to turn this over to our first speakers.
All right, Zach. Thanks for the warm introduction. We appreciate that. Hope everybody can hear me, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So my name is Jason Smith. I'm the veteran military liaison here for Bradford Health Services. I want to thank everybody for being in attendance today. Thank you if you serve this country. Thanks for your service. If there's any Vietnam vets out there, welcome home. All the family members of service members, thanks for all your support and everything you do as well. We do appreciate y'all. Today, I'm going to cover, first of all, let me say that I'm very honored to be here today to have this opportunity to work with my alumni that got me into recovery 6 years ago and be able to sit up here and talk about my community, the military community, and kind of brief everyone on some of the nuances and some of the cultural behavioral things that we're all about, and plus some of the challenges and barriers we run into when it comes to things like substance use disorder, mental health issues, traumatic brain injury, the whole nine. And then we kind of like go around that to go get the help we need. And I'm glad I'm partnered here today with our veteran counselor, Miss Breanne. She's going to go into our veteran recovery program and military recovery program here at Madison and talk a little bit more about the modalities. And then at the end of this, we'll wrap it up with some question and answer at the end, and just look forward to the rest of the session. So I'd like to start off first. It's important for us to understand before we know the outcome, we kind of got to know where we start. And so I asked the question, what makes a young man, a young woman decide to raise their right hand and write a blank check to Uncle Sam to give up a lot of their freedoms to go protect ours? So that's something you got to think about when you're working with a veteran population, when you're looking at that individual across the table from you that suffered from substance use disorder or mental health, PTSD, trauma, and grief. Think about when they first came in. A lot of us were typically in high school or maybe early college or maybe just working a job and wanted to do something different. Something motivated us to raise our right hand and do this job. And there's been 5 different things that have come up in studies that say this is why most of us join. One of the number one things that we see a lot of times is patriotism. And we're in the, coming off the back end of the 22-year anniversary of 9/11. And for those of you on the call that remember that day, I know every one of us can remember where we were at and what we were doing. And we also know that day changed the course of a lot of lives for a lot of families, for a lot of military families and first responders, the whole nine. If you were around during 9/11 and you can remember 9/12, you might remember what patriotism felt like. And most of you will probably be shaking your head right now. Yeah, I remember that, because you couldn't walk into a place without somebody just saying good morning and being empathetic with every human, contact interaction. And so that patriotism, a lot of times, is what drives us to make that decision to join the U.S. military. Another one is that sense of belonging, because for most of us, in high school, if we belonged to groups, maybe I played baseball, so that was my thing. So I had a team. Football, that was our thing. And when I got out, I didn't belong to anything. And a lot of us want something a little bit greater than ourselves. And the military does give us that. That picture on the top right-hand corner depicts the end of what's called the Crucible at Marine Corps boot camp. And what they do is they spend 72 hours. They're up all day, and they are earning the title Marine, and they are earning what's called their Eagle Globe and Anchor. And once that Eagle Globe and Anchor is put in that hand by that drill instructor, like you see on that picture, it changes their course of life for the rest of their life. They'll always be Marines. The same thing with the soldiers, airmen, Navy, even our coasties out there. It's a big deal, and it's something we're very proud of. And so a lot of your military members that you're dealing with, that's why they join. And you got to think too, a lot of us, we want a better life at the end of the day. Some of us, a majority of us come from working in poor class families, like I did. And, I just wanted something different. I wanted to make something of myself. I saw my dad work himself to death almost doing sheet metal and roofing for years. I wasn't ready to go to college, and I was just ready to go out and do something different. And, the Marine Corps gave me that. It gave me a better life. I retired after 20 years, and, minus a few things, it's been real good. And, some of us like that adventure and education piece of it, because you're going to get a chance to see a lot of things. Some things are good, some things are bad, but you're going to get a chance to see a lot. And then the educational benefits you really can't beat. I completed my bachelor's degree when I was in the military, didn't pay a dime, and I completed my master's degree with my GI Bill. And then my child uses half my other GI Bill to finish his master's degree. So there's some real good benefits when it comes to that. And so a lot of us don't have the money to pay for college. I know I didn't. My dad didn't. And so that's why I didn't go to college to play baseball. Was one of the main reasons. But, had to find another means, and that was just a great means. Another one is, well, there we go. Family tradition is a big one. Family members who have served. My father was drafted in Vietnam. My grandfather was at Pearl Harbor. And I had 6 uncles, all in the military, 2 in the Marines. And so it was a family tradition in my family. And so a lot of us want to uphold that. So the folks that you're getting that are hitting rock bottom right now with the substance use disorder and mental health, when they initially came in, they were happy-go-lucky, joined what I call a tribe, because that's what we are, and did their time in the military. And, one thing about the cultural aspect, we know why we join. Those are the top 5 things. But when you talk about the cultural aspect to join the military, when you come in, we're a little bit different in the way we operate. We do operate as a tribe. We work on what's called collectivism, where it's actually more about the team and the mission before self, always. So meaning whatever that mission is, we've got to go do. My brothers and sisters to my left and my right, those are the most important things in my life. And I am not so much important because I've got to support them in the mission. And that's just our thought process. And that's ingrained from day one. When you go to boot camp, you walk in, you're pretty much stripped down of everything you believe, everything you've learned, and you're built back up. And I think in a much better product as well. But you're taught what comes first is taking care of that mission and taking care of the people around you. And that tends to stay with us for quite some time. We have definitely a different language system. We talk. If any of you on this call have ever been around 2 veterans talking, you probably look at us kind of weird and say, and we're just laughing and cutting up, our sides hurting. It's just what we do. We can connect. It's kind of like really a big fraternity and sorority. Once we find out you serve, it's like we've eaten the same dirt together. We've experienced some of the same things. And that brotherhood and sisterhood is very tight. And every branch of service has values. And you got to remember this: honor, courage, and commitment. All of these things, these words mean something. And so for our veterans, that when we're talking about recovery and all that, we try to reinstate and reinstill those values back in them. Like, remember when you joined, why did you join? Where are you trying to get to now? And that kind of leads into the stoic philosophy of the military, which can be a barrier as well, which kind of feeds into the stigma is, saying, hey, I've got this, I don't need help. A stoic attitude is pretty much, I I don't want to show weakness. I've got this. And that mentality right there, it's great when you're in combat operations or humanitarian operations or going out there doing your job and you've got to move. But sometimes when you're in a constant fight or flight for so long and you're using on the side of that substance and you're struggling with a mental health issue, all of that stuff can swell up. And that's where we run into the issue of them not raising that right hand again to volunteer, go get some help. And that's one of the most tragic things is trying to get that across. That's okay to say you're not okay, and it's okay to ask for help. Another thing about the military for our culture, we do use irreverent humor quite a bit. It's just the nature of the beast. And if there's any first responders, firefighters, police officers, nurses, doctors, we tend to do that. Y'all tend to do that as well. And that irreverent humor for us is more of a coping mechanism a lot of times to some of the stuff that we see. So we do tend to make light of a lot of things. I know when I retired from the Marine Corps, went into the civilian world and went into corporate HR, my irreverent humor wasn't cut out for everybody. It was just a different thing. And so, but for a lot of us, that's a way we cope with some of the tragedies and some of the things we witness, and just, you know, being around your brothers and sisters, and you can talk openly and freely, really makes you feel at home. You know, and that picture on the bottom right, I can't say enough, you know, about sacrifice. You know, these men and women have, like I said, they've written that blank check to Uncle Sam. They have given up a lot of their freedoms, and someone paid the ultimate price. And you know, as a fellow Marine, and you know, seeing that picture and being a part of that ceremony before, it really sticks with you. And so there's that sacrifice part they're also dealing with, which brings on that grief. You know, why wasn't it me? That kind of stuff. And so, you know, when you talk about culture and norms for the military, there are some different aspects in this small population. And sacrifice is definitely one of the top ones. We keep moving on to some of the challenges and barriers that may create. And this doesn't create that for everybody. I want to be clear about that. And everybody gets out of the military and has a substance use disorder and all that. There is a higher percentage, obviously, that we've noted. But still, that challenge may not come along until later on in your life after you've retired. And so I want to talk about some of the challenges that our service member men and women face when they get out of the military. One of the biggest challenges is transitioning to civilian life. You know, we spent, for example, the Marines, we spent 13 weeks in boot camp. And then we spent 3 days at the end of our career, whether it's 4 years or 30, we spent about 3 to 4 days in a TAPS class. And they basically go over how to write a resume, what to do, what to expect, and then they say bye. That's not enough time when you've been taught to go from 0 to 60 in an organization that teaches you to defend this country. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that. So when we get out, sometimes we're not prepared for that culture shock that we're going to witness. And on the other hand, a lot of these organizations that hire veterans are not prepared either, because they're not exactly sure what can we say, what can we not say, why is he or she acting like that. If you'll notice anything about the military, if you have a meeting at 9 o'clock, we're probably going to be there at 8:30. So you can depend on us being there early. But there's also a lot of other issues when transitioning to civilian life, because once you transitioned out and you're in civilian life, you know, for me personally, when I left my tribe and I left the Marine Corps, that's when the real struggle started for me. I was already drinking pretty heavily, but when I got out and didn't have a platoon to go to in the morning or a company formation to go take care of my Marines, it wasn't all, you know, roses and flowers and everything like they said it would be when I retired. It was completely different. So that can be definitely a challenge. Probably what drives that suicide rate and a lot of these other rates that we're going to talk about in a minute is finding purpose, because once you get out, you've lost that purpose. And once you lose that sense of purpose, that can just be fuel for the fire for that SUD and that mental health. And so very, very important. You know, when I'm kneecap with my veterans, and I do peer recovery support in Tennessee and Alabama, when I'm sitting down with them, you know, it's like, let's talk about finding purpose. Like, what does that mean to you? And, you know, there's so many opportunities out there today with the 501c3s out there that support veterans. There's opportunities in local churches. There's opportunities to do all kinds of different things, get involved. And so finding purpose is, you know, when they come to treatment with us, we do focus on them, you know, going back to work, finding a job, find something they want to do, try to connect them to people out in town that can help them kind of guide them along in that journey. Because when you've been at rock bottom for so long, you've got to find something that can, so you don't have idle hands, so you can go out there and make a difference. And that's very important. And that's what we were doing when we decided to join the military in the first place. We want to get them back in that mindset. Third, reaching out for help. Right here, I'm a number one culprit of that. I truly did not understand what was going on with me. I didn't understand why I was having anger issues. I didn't understand a lot of things that were going on. I didn't understand why I was drinking so much, why I couldn't stop. But the last thing I ever wanted to do was to let somebody know I was having a problem. And that's that stoic behavior that we tend to wrap ourselves around. It's like, suck it up, buttercup, I got it. And I did, and I thought I did, but I didn't have it at all. So reaching out for help is one of the big challenges. And if I can just get them to remember they've raised their right hand before to volunteer for this country, I really try to press them a little bit to raise their right hand to volunteer for themselves and their family to go get some help. Now, with challenges, there are barriers sometimes, and some of the barriers really is for us is knowledge of resources. You remember back, I just said we spent 13 weeks in boot camp getting trained to be Marines, and we spent 3 or 4 days getting out. They tell us about a few resources, but we don't understand everything. And I think one of the biggest shortfalls is that we don't know about all the great things that really are, like in the VA system. For our veterans, the VA's coming a long way. The whole health program, the nutrition, the peer support, the substance abuse program, the PTSD counseling, the PRRC, the Thrive program, which helps them go out and find jobs. There's so much out there, but when we get out, we just don't know about it. Because you know what? We're ready to hang these boots up, go back to our civilian life, whatever we were doing, and then we feel like we don't need help. We feel like we don't need that assistance from the VA. For some of us, it's, I've got both my legs and both my arms, and I got buddies that don't. I don't feel like I deserved the VA benefit. And so I didn't even want to go to the VA when I retired. And unfortunately, a lot of veterans are like that. I run into a lot of vets and even military members who are getting ready to get out that like, I'm not going to deal with the VA. And be honest with you, and if there's anybody that works in the VA on here, I really hope we can change that narrative because I run into so many instances where I'd probably say 6 out of 10 veterans have never been to the VA and have served in combat and done this and done that. And they just, won't get that primary care doctor. They won't go use the resources that are out there. So really education about the resources and changing that narrative is also a big part of our program here. The next one, navigating the VA itself can be challenging and trying to work with them step by step along the way, connecting them with the right people, who they need to talk to, what numbers they need to call. We train them on the My Healthy Vet so they know how to go in there and schedule their appointments, how to order their medication, do all those types of things, how to get access to their education benefits, who their VSO is in their local county. A veteran service officer can help that veteran with disability ratings, upgrades on discharges, all kind of things. So we try to connect them back to the VA before they even leave here, so they've got a good plan once they get out. But that can be one of the barriers. And the number one barrier, probably for me, is ourselves sometimes. We just don't want to seek that help. We don't want to raise that right hand. We don't want to admit we have a problem because then that shows a sign of weakness. And that goes against every ethos we have. And I think that's starting to change. I do a lot of recovery talks to active duty and reserve units and veteran organizations, even the American Legion. I applaud the American Legion. I think the VFW is catching up to the Be the One campaign, be the one to help and ask. So I think things are starting to change in the right direction, but it's going to take a tribe to make that happen. All of us on this call today, and the people we come in contact with, that it's okay to go get help. And some of the results of these challenges and barriers, I know Zach spoke to it earlier. He talked about suicide rates. This is Suicide Prevention Month. If you look at the OIF numbers, over 7,000. I think it's actually 7,252 to be exact. In Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, that's how many service members lost their lives. In that same 20-year period, over 35,000 lost their lives. Their battle with suicide, and that's just what's been counted. The numbers vary between 17 to 40 a day. Depends on which reports you read, who you talk to. Unfortunately, some of the suicides and things that happen are not captured or reported as suicide. It's like they hurt themselves or whatever, even drug overdoses, things of that nature. So that's a huge number in a small population. Remember, the veteran population makes up about 6.4% of the United States population. So we're in active duty is only just a little over 1%. So it's a very small group. And to have that many, that speaks volumes of the work we got to do. And as much as I love the 22 push-ups a day, I love the t-shirts and the hikes and the rucks and all that. But at the end of the day, it's really about what do I do in a crisis? Who do I call and how do I get help? Those are the top three things we need to focus on for these veterans and military members to get the help they need. Divorce rates speak for themselves in the military, twice the average of the civilian lifestyle. So that plays a factor in recovery. That plays a factor in mental health, physical health, spiritual health, the whole nine. So that is also an issue. And then take note of the homelessness. We researched this. I was very surprised to find out that around 11% of our population, of the homeless population, is veterans. Considering we only make up 6.4%, that's pretty significant. And we see this a lot in the VA HUD-VASH program, and there's a lot of 501c3s and different organizations out there that help with housing. Transitional housing is probably one of the most important things I would love to see more of for some of our homeless veterans. We just don't have enough of it. But a lot of them do come to us that are homeless. And so we work with them one-on-one with a HUD-VASH counselor, with the VA, try to find them placing, or we'll use somebody like Priority Veterans or Still Serving Veterans or the Vet Centers. We'll reach out to them to try to find these resources for these veterans to get that homeless population down. So those are some of the results of those challenges and barriers I spoke about. And plus that culture also plays in. And I know Zach had mentioned that, I was in recovery for 6 years and I think 4 weeks, 1 day today. So I'm really happy about that. But I can tell you, this picture right here kind of says it all. This is where I was at August 16th of 2017. I was at a fork in the road in my life where, I was dealing with both a substance use disorder and a mental health issue. And I had an opportunity, or I needed an opportunity to go ask for help, but I didn't know how to do that. And the number one, and I say this in my recovery talk all the time, the number one, I say, killer of veterans and military, it's not Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. A lot of times it's the stigma. The stigma of reaching out for help is taking more lives in the last 20 years. And it's shown by some of the rates we've seen in suicides and everything else. And so I'm starting to hear the commanders and sergeant majors, some of these active duty units are starting to say, you know what, we've got to do a better job. We've got to teach resiliency. We've got to teach them about asking for help and make that help available so they know who to talk to. So I think if we can remove that word from our vocabulary, where there's never an opportunity for us to go down that path to the left like I and so many others have, I think we'll have a much more significant outcome when it comes to lowering suicide rates, homelessness, is the whole nine, SUDs, you name it, across the board. When I was at this point, I knew what I was dealing with. I was starting to have poor relationships with my family, with my friends, with my coworkers. I was working in the HR field. It's tough to be a guy with anger issues working in the HR field. Is tough anyway, much less being a retired Marine. So that was very challenging. But those poor relationships were starting to add up and starting to have consequences. And we know later on, if that continues to happen, it's only going to get worse with time. I was also starting to have health issues, all kind of different things. I was getting out of shape. I mean, I don't know. I just wasn't feeling very well. From stomach pains, all kind of weird chronic pain was going on, neck and back. And chronic pain can come a lot from a lot of stress and anxiety, which I was not dealing with at the time, but I did have. And so that's why my pain was becoming unbearable. The sleep issue, I wasn't sleeping at night. So imagine sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, taking maybe an Ambien for that, then getting up in the morning and having back and neck pains and taking something for that. And then, not being able to communicate effectively with my wife of, at that time, over 20 years, who had followed me around the world. My kids who loved me to death, not being able to do things with them because I just, for whatever reason. I mean, it's just not a good scenario. It wasn't a good scenario for me when I was looking at this path here. I would say I had PTSD and depression, and that's something I never wanted to admit. My scariest thing about going to treatment truly was about asking for help. And I did not want to think, I didn't think I had that. And luckily I got it with a good therapist who was a Navy corpsman. And when he broke down the signs and broke down everything that I was dealing with, it was textbook, and it really opened my eyes. but I was having increased usage when it came to alcohol, the occasional pain pill, and everything else I was taking. It started getting worse and worse and worse. And I think that's about the time the suicidal ideations started happening. So if you look at this, this left-hand side of the road, it only goes one direction. It doesn't get better with time. And when I say this, it breaks my heart. I've lost more to suicide than I ever did in combat operations. And, I just, if I could get across, like, it's okay to go ask for help, and recovery on this side of the fence is much better. And that's my main job. That's my main goal and my main mission. And the first step in that really for me was admitting I had a problem and realizing I couldn't do this on my own. I couldn't take this on. This wasn't a combatant. This wasn't the enemy. It was the enemy, but I had to take it on a different way. So I had to admit I had a problem. And I can tell you, when I told my wife that I didn't want to do this anymore, one of the first things she said, "What are you talking about, our marriage?" I'm like, no, I can't do the drinking anymore. I need help. And luckily, I had a best friend of mine whose sister had been through Bradford and knew about the veterans program, and I was just grateful to hear about it and be able to be alumni. Meant a lot and saved my life and turned my life around. After I admitted I had a problem, I went to seek help through my HR department. I called my EAP, Employee Assistance Program. They called my employee relations. I told my boss. You know what I thought? I thought I was going to get fired. That's not what happened at all. What happened was I went to treatment for 30 days. I got IOP for 6 months. My job I didn't lose my job. I went right back to teaching class again. And they supported me the whole way. And I think there's a stigma too about what the HR or what my boss might say about me having an issue. And I think that's another stigma too. And another stigma also, with us is security clearance. There's a lot of us that do contract work for the federal government. I worked for the federal government for 1.5 years. I had to have a secret clearance. Hey, I put in my paperwork and I told them I went to treatment. This is why, and this is what I did. I gave them all the medical notes. At the end of the day, I got my security clearance back. I had a top secret clearance when I got out of the Marine Corps, and I needed a secret clearance to work for the National Guard, and that's what I got. It was about being open and honest, and they were very forgiving for that. The veteran recovery program I went through was great. I stayed in a cabin with 12 other veterans, and we did programming together. We went to the gym together. We did grief and trauma counseling together, which was amazing. And I learned about things like mindfulness and all these great modalities that really help us out. And I started learning new pathways to recovery and what that meant. For me, I'm an outdoors guy. I love to hunt, fish, scuba dive. I like to do landscaping. I just have to find something, better off that'll help me stay in recovery. And one of the big things is service to others. I think, I found that to be one of the most prevalent when you talk about purpose and meaning and sense of belonging. I think one of the greatest things you can do is provide service to another human being. And in our field, when a vet helps another vet, we tend to see a better outcome. And so that's what I try to share with my veterans in the program at all of our campuses. When we talk about the subject is, what can you do now? Now that you see the other side, what can you do now to help out another veteran? How about telling them about some of the great things at the VA? How about telling them about some of the great organizations you can get involved with? And that really pays dividends in the long run when it comes to sobriety. And then exploring new pathways. I'm very open-minded. I didn't know what to think about acupuncture when I did it. I thought it was voodoo, but I love it. It was great. So chronic pain, I tell all my veterans, go to the VA, tell them about this, see about getting that acupuncture done. And overall, this whole thing really, really improved my quality of life. I just celebrated 25 years with my wife. I just watched my daughter get married, and I got to put my dress blues on and walk her down the aisle. My son's a senior in college right now, and I'm here helping veterans and being here with you all today. It's amazing. And so if we can help break that stigma together, that's what we're here to do today. And it's not just for my group, it's for every group that's on this call today and anyone who's struggling with this stuff. So I'm going to turn this over in just a second to Miss Breanne Marshall, who is our veteran counselor. And I'm going to leave this picture up here on the screen here. As you see, this is a service member. I don't know if y'all have ever heard, but there's a poem out there. It's called "Soldier with PTSD Fell into a Hole and Couldn't Get Out." We don't know who the author is. I don't know if we'll ever know. But it's a very, very powerful poem, and it speaks dividends to what a veteran who's got a SUD and MI may be going through when they've gotten down to the bottom. And I'm gonna let Miss Bree read this poem because I can't get through it. I've tried, I can't. So she's gonna help me out on this. And then we're gonna transition into our Veterans Recovery Program and go from there. So thank you all for your time today. I'll be in the background over here and I'm gonna turn it over to Miss Bree to read a soldier.
Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be able to be a part of this wonderful experience. As Jason said, I am one of the counselors here. And before I start talking about the clinical role or the clinical aspect that I provide to my vets on a daily basis, I will be reading this poem. So I want each of you to just look at this picture, kind of see what he's doing. And as I'm reading this poem, I want you to kind of be able to visualize. I want you guys to go with me. So again, like I said, I will be reading this poem. A senior NCO went by and the soldier with PTSD called out for help. The senior NCO yelled told him to suck it up, dig deep and drive on, then threw him a shovel. But the soldier with PTSD could not suck it up and drive on, so he dug the hole deeper. A senior officer went by and the soldier with PTSD called out for help. The senior officer told him to use the tools your senior NCO has given you, then threw him a bucket. But the soldier with PTSD was using the tools his senior NCO gave him, so he dug the hole deeper and filled the bucket. A psychiatrist walked by. The soldier with PTSD said, "Help, I can't get out." The psychiatrist gave him some drugs and said, "Take this, it will relieve the pain." The soldier with PTSD said thanks, but when the pills ran out, he was still in the hole. A well-known psychologist rode by and heard the soldier with PTSD cry out for help. He stopped and asked, "How did you get there? Where were you? Were you born there? Did your parents put you there? Tell me about yourself. It will alleviate your sense of loneliness." So the soldier with PTSD talked with him for an hour. Then the psychologist had to leave, but he said he'd be back next week. The soldier with PTSD thanked him, but he was still in the hole. A priest came by. The soldier with PTSD called for help. The priest gave him a Bible and said, "I'll say a prayer for you." He got down on his knees and prayed for the soldier with PTSD. Then he left. The soldier with PTSD was very grateful. He read the Bible, but he was still stuck in the hole. A recovering soldier with PTSD happened to be passing by. The soldier with PTSD cried out, "Hey, help me, I'm stuck in this hole." Right away, the recovering soldier with PTSD jumped down in the hole with him. The soldier with PTSD said, "What are you doing? Now we're both stuck here." But the recovering soldier with PTSD said, "Calm down, it's okay. I've been here before and I know how to get out." And this is from an unknown author. So this poem is very powerful and it just kind of shows you, it just kind of takes your mind and shows you a glimpse about what our vets suffer with and deal with. When it comes to, psychiatrists or psychologists, wanting to treat them with medicine, but giving them medicine, you're not solving the problem. So I'm here to kind of talk about my role and kind of what I do with vets. And I am very grateful to my vets because, when you build and establish rapport with these vets, when they trust you, they will allow you into their world and they trust me. And that rapport has been established and they have allowed me into their world. And I am here to hopefully help make a difference. So now we are going to get into the clinical aspect. All right, so this is the Bradford's Veterans Military Recovery Program. All right, so I'm here to talk to you about the primary program, which it's a minimum of 45 days. So anytime we get a referral from the VA, our vets have a minimum of 45 days, and our extended care program is up to 6 months. That is our ECP program, which stands for Extended Care Program. And a lot of our vets, they choose to do 45 days. I always encourage them to do longer because like I tell them all the time, what are you guys rushing back to? You know, you're rushing back to lack of support or no support. You know, you're rushing back to the mental illness. You're rushing back to the health issues. You know, you're rushing back to the flashbacks. You know, you're rushing back to things that we can help you and provide and give you that while you're here. So I always encourage my vets to take advantage of what the VA is offering you. You know, take advantage of the 6 months, because, you know, you got to think about it like this. If you've been in active addiction for 20, 30 years, 45 days does not compare to how long you've been in active addiction. So I always try to just encourage them, because of course I can't make them do anything, but I always try to encourage them to see the big picture, because if they stay in our program for 6 months, at least they'll know that they'll get that sense of belonging. They'll be able to establish those relationships with other vets. They'll be able to, you know, work on their health issues while they're here, which I'm sure, because a lot of them come in here with health issues, mental health, and it is only addressed when they come in here. So if they stay here for the ECP program, you know, we have a psychiatrist and we have a nurse practitioner, you know, who can really work with them and who can really get them on the right medications, you know, that can help them. And not only that, but it gives them an overall better chance of success with their recovery. And like I tell them all the time, you know, you guys have got to choose what it is that you want, what you need to do instead of your wants. You know, who wants to stay in an inpatient treatment facility for 6 months? Not a lot of people. But at the end of the day, if you take away your wants and allow yourself to have a chance with your needs, we will have a lot better outcome. So here are some of the criteria for our ECP program, or our VET program. We have trauma history or PTSD. We work with them on that. Previous failed treatment episodes, negative environmental factors, lack of positive support, complicating medical concerns, co-occurring mental health and psychiatric issues, which for a lot of our vets, you know, addiction and mental health go hand in hand. And addiction is just a small portion of the problem. So if we can really get in there and if we can really work with them on what is causing you to drink, what is causing you to do drugs, you know, why, you know, every time you have a bad day, you know, your first option is to go to the drugs, go to the alcohol, because you want to suppress or you don't want to deal with. So that's kind of what we deal with here. The legal involvement, recommendation for Veterans Court, lack of financial knowledge and tools, recommendations from our VA case manager, which her name is Celeste, and she's awesome. We'll kind of talk about her a little bit later. Loss and grief, and homelessness, which Jason kind of touched on that. So those are some of the criteria for our ECP program and our VET program that we kind of offer and that we use here to see if they're appropriate for this program. All right, so now I will be talking about our level system. The level, we have level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. And the thing that I love about our level system is it provides accountability and responsibility to our vets. And it allows them to kind of be able to kind of see and judge where they are. So we're going to jump into level 1. So level 1 is typically anywhere between day 1 and 14. So typically the first 2 weeks, that is kind of what we focus on. Our vets are, they're detoxing. We're trying to get them stable, because the better they feel, the better they will be to jump into the recovery portion. So that is anywhere between the first 1 to 14 days. So the first 2 weeks, we're just trying to detox them, get them stable. So that way we can go ahead and get them into their recovery program. Level 2 is anywhere between days 15 and day 30. So that'll be kind of the next 2 weeks. We focus on recovery. We do exposure to outside 12-step community. So they start developing a rapport with their counselor. We transition them to the vet wing, so they're able to develop relationships and the camaraderie among the other vets. So that is level 2, and that's kind of usually our primary focus within days 15 to day 30. All right, and then level 3, that is day 31 to day 45. All right, so if they just choose to do the 45 days, this is kind of where the focus of their treatment will stop. And during the level 3 program, we will focus on their recovery. We will dig deeper into their clinical work. whether it be, you know, a lot of our vets, you know, anniversaries are a trigger for them. Kind of like what was mentioned earlier, 9/11. That was a big trigger for our vets. So anytime a vet is experiencing a trigger, we identify our triggers, we identify coping skills. You know, communication is key. You know, like I tell my vets all the time, I can't help you if I don't know that there's a problem. So now we're working on that communication piece, that rapport is being established, our relationship is getting stronger. They're developing that trust in me to allow me to help them in their recovery. And then also sponsor relationships, building step work and sober leisure activities. The thing that I love too about our VA program is we encourage sponsorships. We allow sponsors to come in, of course, once they've been screened and once we feel like they're a good fit with our vets, and they start step work. They start working on the 12 steps. They develop the rapport and the relationship with their sponsor. So that way, when they leave treatment, you know, at least they've already got some of their step work started. And of course, the sober leisure activities. With our vets, you know, we are recovery based, but it is good to allow them to get out of the building. We have outings with our rec staff. We take our VAs, you know, on outings. And the good thing about our sober leisure activities is it teaches our vets that they can have a good time and not be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They can laugh and they can joke and they can go play golf, or they can, you know, go watch a movie, or whatever that sober leisure activity is teaching them that they can do these things being clean and sober. So that is one thing that I love that we do provide here for our vets. And also level 4, which is our ECP program. It is anywhere between day 46 in 6 months. So the primary focus for our level 4 program, we focus on the recovery plans, solidifying discharge plan. We have awesome discharge planners here that work with our vets, whether they need housing, whether it's HUD-VASH, whether it's rebuilding that relationship with their families to see if maybe they can come home, or whatever that discharge plan looks like, whether it's getting them established in the VA, getting them a primary doctor, you know, setting up appointments. You know, we help our vets do all of that. So that way, when they leave our facility, they will be better off to go ahead and continue their recovery journey. See, here we give them the tools that they need, but when they leave here, it's up to them for them to put those tools in place. And then, of course, giving back service work outside of the community through mentor systems. I tell my vets all the time, service work starts in here. Whether you're encouraging somebody that comes in, whether you are, you know, holding the door open for somebody, whether, you know, you're being of service to our janitorial staff, you know, and we do have a service work program that our rec staff does utilize with our vets here. But definitely service work starts in here because we want them to get into the process of being able to be of service to someone in our program. So that way, when they leave here, they can start doing service work in the community. So this is our level system, just kind of breaks it down from our primary program, which is 45 days, and our ECP program, which is up to 6 months. All right, so now I'm going to talk about kind of what we offer here for our vets. We offer, they're called specialty groups. CPT, it stands for Cognitive Processing Therapy. It really deals with our vets who struggle with PTSD. They talk about stuck points, and they talk about the trauma they've experienced, because before we can, you know, fix a problem, we first got to identify what the problem is. So CPT is a really good group for our vets to be a part of. Basically, it's CPT and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, they kind of go hand in hand. So it's kind of teaching them to retrain their thought process, you know, replacing those negative thoughts with positive thoughts. In ACT, that's a group that I facilitate. It stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Basically, it mainly deals with anger, and the goal of ACT is overall getting to a healthy place psychologically. So we do a lot of coping skills. We do a lot of breath work. We do a lot of mindfulness techniques. You know, the goal of that is basically to get them to a healthy place psychologically. And then we have grief group, because we know that a lot of our veterans, especially if they were in active combat, they've experienced a lot of grief, whether it be their fellow soldier or whoever. Just having to come home and just having to deal with that, whether it's a death date anniversary. So the grief group, that is really a good group that teaches our vets and allows our vets to be able to deal with and handle grief in healthy ways instead of reverting back to drinking and using drugs. And then we have a forgiveness group. That's a really good group that has been implemented as one of our specialty groups as well. And then we have just added the financial responsibility group with the First Command advisors. That is a really good group that kind of teaches our vets about the financial aspect, because a lot of our vets, they do get monthly income coming in from the VA. So it kind of teaches them it teaches them basically money management, how to be able to manage their money. And then we have pet therapies with pet partners. We have a service dog that comes in and our vets love her. She's awesome. So that kind of, we have the pet therapy partners as well. We have vet arts and crafts from Help Heal Veterans. Our vets do that every Tuesday. They're able to go into rec and they're able to do a project. They're able to do art. They're able to really express their tools and their talents in a positive way. And that is every Tuesday that we do with our vets. And then we have our veteran Sunday school with Willowbrook Baptist. Of course, that is optional, but they come out most Sundays. And they'll have Sunday school with them. They'll bring their deacons. They'll talk to the vets for any vet who is interested in working on their spirituality while they're here. They do have that option. And then, of course, we have the weekly veterans. We have the leisure outings with our vets, which REC facilitates that. Our vets go on weekly outings once a week. And that's, of course, if they qualify. Because the good thing, the thing about our program is first thing first. We got to work on recovery. You've got to attend programming. You've got to do your part. Then, of course, if you do your part, then, you are able to reap the benefits of coming here, putting in work, and just get out of the building and have a little fun. So that's kind of our weekly outings that we do with our vets that is facilitated by our REC staff. All right, and of course, this is our Madison campus. You see in this picture, it's Jason and Celeste. She is our VA case manager. She is awesome. She works really hard with our vets. She assists with helping them set up the VA portal, getting their benefits and insurance started. She lets them know about the education and the vocational rehab that's available to them. She is responsible for setting up transportation, whether it's to and from doctor's appointments, if they're discharging. So she is responsible for setting that up. She works on housing or HUD badge, just making sure that they have their vouchers. If they need a birth certificate, if they need their social security card, if they need their driver's license. A lot of vets come here and they get their driver's license, and so she is kind of responsible for just kind of helping them transition back into society when they leave here. And of course, she does all the medical appointments. She sets them up. She is in contact with her doctors. And also, she also does the disability, the initial filing and the follow-up. So like I said, she is awesome. She works very hard with our vets, and we are very appreciative for her and all that she does for our vets. All right, and this is, and I really love this. This is from our vets. We have started doing something that is called a round table with our vets. We do that quarterly. And basically what that is quarterly, we get our vets together. Usually they meet in the rec room and we kind of talk about, maybe the pros and cons of the vet program, what we could do differently, what they would like to see improved, because this is their program. So it's important to get feedback from them, because I may, as a counselor, think that the program is going well, but it's important to get feedback from the ones who are actually in the program. So like I said, we do a round table, we get their feedback, we listen to what they have to say, and we see overall how they feel like the vet program is going. So in our veterans' own words, thank you for a life-changing experience here at Bradford. I really appreciate the love and care from your staff. That was from one of our former patients. Another patient, thank you for giving the veterans their own wing, all to themselves. We feel free to talk among ourselves and are very grateful for this gift. And that is another thing that we do offer our vets here. They have their own wing. It's nothing but vets down there. They have a community room where they can watch TV, a laundry facility, laundry area. They eat together. So it is basically their own little community. I love the financial specialty group. It should be an ECP prerequisite. It totally changed the way I see my finances. So that is something awesome, a positive aspect from one of our specialty groups. So that's awesome. And then I am thankful for Miss Celeste, my counselor and my nurse practitioner. I always took the time to hear what I needed and to help me. Even when I didn't think I wanted help, they hung in there with me. I won't forget this place. So these are just kind of some words these are just kind of some words that came from our vets. And I think a lot of things too about working with our vets is, you know, me as a counselor, I have to meet my veterans where they are, not where I wish they were, not where I want them to be. I have to meet them where they are. And if I meet them where they are, and if I establish that relationship and rapport with them, then we are able to do some really, really good work. So that is just kind of in our own veterans' words, kind of what they think and how they feel about our program. And this is just a picture of Casual Friday. Casual Friday, not always a good idea. So I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to allow me and Jason to give you some information about our program. Me as a counselor, the clinician role, kind of what I do on a daily basis. We love what we do. We enjoy what we do. And I do hope that this presentation and things that we said, I do hope that, you know, that was very helpful for you all. There will be a question portion at the end of this. If you guys have any questions for me or Jason, please feel free to ask. Thank you guys. Have a good Friday.
Hello, my name is Leah Parker. I am the therapist at a program in Tuscaloosa called A Reprieve for Women. I'm going to be talking to you guys today about treating women in this population. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this and share experience and feedback and research that we've seen over time. This is a specialty population. I will say just in my experience, the needs for women are different. The need for advocacy for women's needs and treatment is certainly there. And just in my experience and just even researching for this presentation, you know, there is not a ton of research about women in treatment. And also there are not as many treatment options for women as there are for men. So there's a lot more that we need to kind of do in the field of working with women and treating women. However, there are good options out there. And so my goal today and working with you guys and sharing this presentation is to go over what are some treatment barriers that exist, what's the development of substance use in women, what does presentation in substance use with women look like, what are some best treatment approaches with women, what works, what doesn't work, and then what are the roles of providers and communities and things like that. So before I get into that, like I said, my name is Leah Parker. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I've been with Bradford, as Zach introduced me earlier, for 11 years, and I've been with Reprieve for Women for 6 years. And I started off my career working at our inpatient facility in Warrior at the all-female cottage, and I should have known that was just going to be laying the foundation, because here I am 6 years working with all women again. So I've worked with men and women, and more specifically women, in the past 6 years. And so I'm excited to share my experiences. I'm excited to share what we kind of look at and what we research. And what I hope overall is to provide you guys with a little more understanding of addiction, and especially addiction in women and the needs that they have. So we're going to kind of get into this presentation. We're going to start off with is the development of substance use in women. The most common contributing factors to the development of the substance use disorder in women is genetics, untreated mental health, trauma, life stressors, increased susceptibility. So we're going to kind of be looking at those a little more extensively. When we look at genetics, obviously we know that genetics impact the development of substance use disorder, also impacts the sustainment of substance use disorder for both men and for women. It impacts the number of receptors in the brain, which is linked to substance use. What we have also observed over time is that, and studies in science show us that substance use impacts the neurotransmitter pathways in the brain. And so what you'll see often, and different things impact that, but genetics is definitely one of them. And I'm not sure if anybody's worked with a client or had a client that when they tell you their first experience in substance use, whether it be drugs or whether it be alcohol, what you'll hear often is it felt like an immediate solution. It felt like I could take a deep breath. It felt like I was able to feel something I've never been able to feel before. And a lot of times it's because when you put drugs and alcohol through those pathways that are dysregulated, it makes it feel like it's working properly when it wasn't working properly previously. So those genetics are a big factor of one of the ways those pathways get dysregulated, which can lead to the development of a substance use disorder. We also know studies that show us that if you have a parent that is an addict or an alcoholic, you're 8 times more likely to develop an addiction yourself. And so we know that genetics play a factor in the development of substance use, and it's important to know these things. When you're treating clients, when you're treating patients, that's an important thing to keep in mind. And it's helpful for them to understand that too. More times than not, there's a great deal of shame that's carried in having addiction to begin with, and knowing and understanding that there are lots of factors that are going on in their brain that they're not 100% in control of. That's important for them to know and to understand. If you ever get more curious about the genetics of addiction, I would suggest you check out Kevin McCauley. He is a fellow at a program called The Meadows, and he's done a lot of research on the genetics and the neurochemistry of the brain and addiction. And he has a DVD. It's called Pleasure Unwoven. About an hour long. You can get it on Amazon for about $25. And it probably does one of the better jobs of explaining the neurochemistry in the brain. So if that's something that intrigues you, if that's something that's interests you, then I would certainly suggest you check that out. That's a good resource for most people that are treating addiction, especially treating women in addiction. The next factor when we look at the development of a substance use disorder is untreated mental health. We know that women are twice as likely to experience things like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, especially comparatively to their male counterparts. And women also experience hormonal changes that men don't have to go through, but women have to go through. And as a result of those hormonal changes, whether it is through the course of life, not just when you're older, not just when you're younger, but by and large, there are these changes that happen regularly and frequently that impact mental health. They impact how we experience mental health, impact how significant our mental health looks like. And so that's an important factor to consider when we're looking at treating mental health. That is something that certainly develops the substance use over time. I would also say that when we look at untreated mental health, what I've observed is that women tend to be very powerful advocates for mental health, especially in others. They want them to get the help that they need. They want them to get the treatment that they need. They're very outspoken about the need for mental health. What I also find is that they are less likely to utilize and get those needs met for themselves. And so oftentimes it's a barrier when we get to treatment is women are such harsh advocates for it, but then at the same time, it's difficult for them to see that in themselves. And it's difficult to see the presentation of it as well. And sometimes it's just really challenging when you're struggling with mental health is to know what's normal and what's not normal. And if you're not talking about it and it's not something and it's something that carries a great deal of shame, better understanding what you're experiencing and how normal or not normal that is, it can certainly be challenging. And so untreated mental health is a massive aspect of what it develops the substance use over time. And sometimes it's hard to know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Is it that the mental health created a substance use disorder? Is it that the substance use disorder created mental health? Sometimes it's really challenging to ascertain the difference between those two things. What I tell women in treatment is it is less important. It's less important how we got here because the treatment's the same regardless. Here we are. So we have to figure out how to help and how to deal with these things because here they are and they're presenting themselves now. The next thing we look at when we look at the development of substance use disorder is, oops, let me go back. There we go. The next thing we look at is trauma. Trauma is certainly an impact in the development of substance use disorder. When we get women into treatment, we see that 74% of addicted women have reported experiencing sexual abuse in their lifetime. Women with trauma in their childhood are 5 times as likely to use drugs and twice as likely to abuse alcohol comparatively to those that didn't experience trauma in their childhood. 4 out of 5 women seeking treatment also report a history of sexual and or physical abuse. And then women also just have a higher propensity for self-blame after experiencing trauma. One of the treatment modalities I'm trained in that we use at the Women's Reprieve is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a form of trauma therapy. And what we do in that work is we identify the trauma event, and the work helps lower the distress of that. But it also isolates and identifies negative beliefs you carry about yourself because of the trauma. More times than not, I can't tell you how many times women come in and they've experienced some kind of trauma, and the belief they carry about themselves is a sense of responsibility. I could have done something differently. I could have fought harder. And a big one is, if I wasn't drunk or if I wasn't high, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And so that self-blame after experiencing trauma is really high, especially in women. And what I would also say is, trauma alters your brain chemistry. When we talked about those neurotransmitter pathways being dysregulated, trauma is one of the things that can dysregulate those pathways. And so being able to identify trauma in women, providing good clinical care for women experiencing trauma is important in the treatment process. And it's a massive part of the development of substance use in women. And when the Reprieve was in its infancy stages, the men's Reprieve existed a lot longer and quicker. It's been around a much greater deal of time than the women's Reprieve has. And when we were developing this program, it became very clear and very evident that the 2 things that needed to exist is there needed to be a greater clinical component in the women's program in order to focus on mental health and to focus on this trauma piece. And so it is important to look at those things because it's a massive part of the addictive process, and whether it developed the substance use or the substance use developed after the trauma, it is a factor. The next thing that is a development in the substance use disorder is life stressors. Women, on average, are more relationally driven than men, and as a result, they accrue more stress because of that. Not every woman is relationally driven. Every woman is different. There's an individuality about women, so I don't want to use a blanket statement because I don't think that's fair to women. However, on average, there does tend to be a little more relational part that drives women. And as a result, there's a lot more stress that's created because of that. Another life stressor that is important when we look at the development of substance use disorder is that women are primary caregivers to children. Even in the most progressive homes, you will see that women carry a larger deal of the domestic household work and the child rearing and the child responsibilities. And so life stressors, therefore, they accrue a lot more stress related to that. And then also, due to the rising cost of living, most households are dependent on a 2-income household at this point, and that just increases stress. That increases responsibility that women not only have with children, but also have in the home, that they also have in their careers. And so because of this, it just generates a lot more stress for women. What I've also observed in working with women is not only do they have increased responsibilities, but they also have an increased sense of what I define as, or what we call, an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. So not only do they have these responsibilities, but what I've observed when women get into treatment is they feel responsible not just for themselves and their children and their well-being and their families and their job, but they'll also feel responsible for everyone else's stress, for everyone else to be okay, for everyone else to be happy. And that overdeveloped sense of responsibility is just another weight, another stressor, another added thing that keeps them wound up, keeps them anxious, and contributes to those mental health issues like depression and anxiety. And so when women get to a women's reprieve, sometimes we have to, it's not every woman, but one of the things we have to unravel is this overdeveloped sense of responsibility. We have to look at that and understand that's a massive part about why it's so challenging and difficult to get them to treatment, get them to stay sober, is what they take on themselves. And so it's important to advocate for them and help them understand how to set boundaries, just internal boundaries, external boundaries. Those all become really important in the treatment process because these life stressors were a massive factor in creating the use and also are going to be consistent factors in maintaining sobriety. A lot of women relapsed because life became too stressful. They had too much on their plate. They couldn't find the time to do all the things they needed to do. There wasn't enough time to go to 12-step meetings. There wasn't enough time to hit therapy appointments. Women tend to be pretty frazzled in that way. And so knowing what's on your plate and then what are you taking on that maybe is not worth to take on. The next thing we look at in the development of a substance use disorder in women is increased susceptibility. Women are likely to develop substance use issues quicker than men. I think by and large, we'll get into this in later slides, but overall, women tend to go faster in substance use. I've observed that I've worked with men and working with women, you'll see a longer use history in men, but you'll see women will use socially to some extent until there's some tipping point. This is specifically with alcohol too. There's some tipping point in which it really becomes a problem and then it just intensifies from there. And so you don't see as much use history sometimes, but you see a quick decline and increased consequences that all happen really fast. Women are also more susceptible to things that are a part of the addictive cycle, like cravings and like relapse. Any addict or alcoholic is susceptible to those things, but what we see is that women are even more susceptible to those two specific parts. Those are just massive parts of the addiction cycle. Women also experience greater health consequences. Health consequences exist across anyone that experiences an addiction if you struggle in that use for any amount or period of time. But women we find have greater health consequences comparatively to men. We see issues in liver functioning. We see issues in also women that struggle. There's a high level of correlation between substance use and eating disorders certainly take a toll on the body. And so when women come into treatment, we start seeing, there's a greater sense of health consequences too. And so that increased susceptibility certainly plays a role in the development of the substance use. Now we're going to look at is the presentation of substance use in women. What do women look like when they come in? What are some factors that those that are providers, those that are clinicians, those that are nurses, whoever is here a part of this program, what do you look for? How do you know that a woman might be struggling with a substance use disorder? What I will say is the first thing to kind of look at is women tend to be higher functioning, especially comparatively to men with a substance use disorder. So it can be tricky in diagnosing women and understanding what's going on and advocating for the help that they need because they don't look necessarily like everything's falling apart. So up until a certain point, I think women tend to be the epitome of it's fine until it's not fine. So we'll see women that are carrying their responsibilities, they're going to work, they're taking care of the kids, they are doing all the things that they need to be doing. What you'll start noticing in women, especially as things are starting to fall apart, is there's an increased sense of there's a frazzledness about them. There's an increased sense of they're stressed. You start seeing a lot of different mood shifts and mood swings. You'll start seeing those things as the wheels kind of start falling off the bus with women, but they keep it together until they don't. And then that decline is rapid, which kind of leads to the next point, which is that women's use escalates far more quickly than men. We explained in the previous slide that less use time than men, but it intensifies more rapidly than it does with men. And so I think that's important to note because if you're a treatment provider and to know and understand that the point of time from there's a problem going on here to the point of crisis and they need help, we need to find a treatment option for them, that's probably going to be a lot shorter in women. And so if you're treating women, knowing that, and knowing what are the resources available to women, what are different treatment options, treatment programs, these things are all very important to have on hand to provide as referrals and working with women, especially if we know that that process is going to go a lot quicker for women. And so, like I said, in my experience, it's typically when I do assessments with women, a lot of times, very, very, very often, it is, oh, it was social, it was social, it was social. And then we hit a point, probably mid-30s or 40s, whether it be life stressors or changes or something shifts or divorce, whatever it is. And then it just got bad and it got quick and then all fell apart very, very fast. And so because we know that the use escalates quickly, it's to be knowledgeable and to be understanding of the different resources available to provide that, because it's going to get worse from that point forward. This is probably the point in which I'll have a little bit of a soapbox, if you will, when it comes to treating women. In the presentation of substance use in women is often, we have misdiagnoses. Mental health is often the presentation. That's what we see out of women more so than substance use. So we'll start seeing their mental health. We'll start seeing that they look overwhelmed. They start having, like we said, mood swings earlier. And so what people will see is they'll see those mental health symptoms. And so then they start trying to treat and diagnose the mental health, when the truth and the reality is there's a substance use disorder that's going on there too. And so it's important for everyone to know and understand that aspect. And I asked the women that I work with, I said, hey, I'm going to be doing this presentation. What do you think it's important for providers to know when it comes to treating women? And one of the most interesting responses, I would say, was one woman said, I think providers, whether it's therapists or whether it's doctors or nurses or whomever, I really think they need to be well-versed in asking thorough questions. Women are typically not going to just volunteer information. And knowing that, we can start ascertaining the difference between what's mental health and what's substance use by asking a lot of thorough questions, kind of getting into the weeds with them, better understanding what's going on, building rapport where they start feeling comfortable to be able to share what's actually going on here. When it comes to mental health presentation, what we see, especially, and this is why it is missed with women a lot, is when there's a substance use disorder, men look very angry. And so therefore it's easy to make that jump to, oh, well, there must be something, they must be taking something, there must be something going on. With women, and I don't mean to overgeneralize this term because I don't like this term, but women look crazy. Men look angry, women look crazy. And so men get into treatment quicker, and they get into treatment, they see the issue that's going on faster because it presents less in the sense of mental health. Is it this diagnosis? Is it this issue? Is it a mood disorder? What's going on with her? And the truth is, it's a substance use disorder that's going on. In treatment, what I see is that women will get misdiagnosed with two disorders. I see it all the time. Women are diagnosed with either borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder. And so as a treatment provider, if you're a treatment provider or a therapist, I urge you to be very, what's the word I would use? Be very conservative in the type of diagnoses you give to women, especially if there's a substance use disorder going on, because diagnoses follow you throughout your treatment. Diagnoses create biases, because if you're a therapist especially, we've all had a borderline personality disorder client, and we all have a sense of, I'm not going to say judgment, but we all have a sense of understanding of what goes on in that situation. It's exhausting to treat an individual that has a personality disorder. And so I just want everyone to consider being very conservative when you diagnose women with substance use disorders. What I observe is that women get into treatment, and by and large, the ones that have those two diagnoses, that's not accurate at all. They just presented that way because think about it, mood swings, erratic behaviors, manic behaviors, worsening relationships, chaotic, stormy relationships, all of these things, women look and present that way when they're going through a substance use disorder. And so those all fit the criteria for those two diagnoses, but when we get into treatment, we actually treat the substance use disorder. We start seeing those things calming down, and we give them good and appropriate coping tools, and those things become so much more manageable. And so diagnoses just follow people. I urge everyone to just consider that when we're working with women, especially. So yeah, that is misdiagnosis is certainly a presentation that happens with women. And so tread lightly is what I would say to that. The last presentation of substance use in women is stigma. For whatever reason, it is easier for people to identify and understand addiction in men than it is for them to understand and identify addiction in women. I don't know the science behind that. I don't understand it. I can just share from my experience in working as a clinician. I've worked with men and I've worked with women. And when men need help, by and large, the overall consensus is, oh my gosh, get them out of here, get them help, treat them immediately, do whatever it takes, just get them out of here and get them help. And with women, before we get to that point, we have to go through a situation of, what? She's an addict? She's an alcoholic? That doesn't seem right. That can't be true. That's not what's going on with her. And so there's far more observing and diagnosing men and getting them help quickly comparatively to women, because whether it's families or the women themselves, there's a certain sense of stigma that has to be reduced in order to understand that this is going on for a woman. And it can happen to women, it can happen to men, it can happen to adolescents. This addiction does not discriminate. So I think those are important factors to consider of what women look like when they're going through a substance use disorder. The next thing that we're going to be looking at after the presentation of substance use in women is treatment barriers. The first things that we look at in regards to treatment barriers is logistics. Logistics will keep women from treatment larger than anything else, I would say. The biggest ones being motherhood, money, and job and career and job disruption. Women, as we said, often take on the more caregiver roles. They attend to children's needs more often and more frequently compared to male counterparts. As I said, even in the most progressive homes where you have two parents that are doing as best as they can the 50-50 in child rearing, there's still that pressure is put on women, and that defaults to women more frequently than it does for men. And so when we get women into treatment, that thought of, you expect me to leave my kids, that's a question that happens nearly every time. And then getting them to treatment, keeping them in treatment, not just getting them to treatment, but keeping them in treatment and overriding that maternal instinct to be away from their children. It's possible, but it's a barrier that we have to watch out for and be mindful of. And as we said, that moms do 2 times the work on average. And so that just leaves a big hole. It leaves a big hole in the home whenever mother is gone from the home for a period of time, especially when we're looking at a lot of women, they're going to need more dual diagnosis care comparatively to men more often than not. And so that means they're going to be in treatment a little bit longer. It's a big logistics that has to be considered, and it's often a barrier. Money, treatment is expensive. And like I said, more times than not, women are more successful when they go to more long-term treatment that has dual diagnoses. And so that is expensive at the end of the day. And so money is 100% a barrier for a lot of people. And then career and job disruption, because they need help and because they need that, they might need more. And then considering being away from a job or your career gets disrupted if you have to go to treatment. And so the logistics of how all of this works are barriers. The next barrier I would consider is stigma. We're saying stigma a lot, but this is true. That's a big, massive part of the development of use. It's we have to look at in treating women. It's a barrier. And what I see often is the perception of what an addict and an alcoholic is does not meet the self-perception of use. And I don't think necessarily that's specific to women, but that is certainly a treatment barrier, because we've come a long way in mental health and advocating for mental health and talking about mental health. However, I would say there is still a large stigma attached to substance use and addiction. As a result of that, what people have in their mind of what addiction is the most devastating, crisis-driven perception of what that would look like, which would be they're constantly in the hospital, or they're homeless or unhoused, they're living under a bridge somewhere. This is still sometimes the perception of what people think addiction looks like. And so because that's the perception, getting people to understand, yes, you have a problem, even if it doesn't look like this, it rattles the sense of self-perception. And a lot of times people will say, well, it's not the worst. I'm not the worst addict or alcoholic. People have it worse. People present much worse. Why would I need help? So that stigma and breaking through that is certainly a barrier that keeps women from getting into treatment. The next barrier I would say is fear. This is a huge one. By and large, especially with those that are suffering from opioid addiction, the pain from detox due to physical dependence is a big thing that keeps people from coming to treatment. More times than not, men and women, at the end of their addiction cycle, before they come into treatment, by and large, they're no longer using to achieve the euphoric effect. They're using a lot more to prevent pain and suffering that comes with how dependent their bodies are on the opiate use. And even so with alcohol and benzodiazepine or sedative use, it's really dangerous to detox from these substances. And so as a result of that, we see that people that struggle with those addictions need a more medical detox and help. And there's just fear that surrounds what's going to go on with you medically through the treatment process. I think another fear, especially with women, is judgment from others. Overall, as we said, women tend to be a little more relationally driven, and so the perception of what is everyone going to think is very high. And it's not just what's my family going to think, or what's my job going to think, but women go beyond that, and it is they have to consider too, what are my kids, the parents of my children's friends going to think? What are my kids' schools going to think? There's also a fear of consequence and retribution because of their substance use. Because women are primary caregivers, there's a huge fear of consequences related to their children. Is CPS going to get involved if I get honest about what's going on? Is my child going to be removed from my care and from my home? Am I going to have to turn over custody to someone else? And sometimes those things are necessary through the treatment process to protect the children. However, that fear of what is going to happen to my child, are people going to find out? What are they going to think? Are massive treatment barriers. And then another fear is just the fear of being treated differently, the fear that things are going to change. And what we help them understand through the treatment process is things are absolutely going to change and they have to change. But there's a great fear of that people are going to treat me differently because they're going to find out that I have a substance use disorder. And sometimes they are treated differently. People are going to walk on eggshells around me. People are going to change their behaviors to be supportive of me, but that's going to feel weird. And then my relationships are going to change. You know, my husband and I drink together. He's going to have to stop drinking to support me. Can he do that? All these things have to change through the treatment process. There we go. Another treatment barrier that we look at is the lack of acceptance. Universally, this is across the board with addiction as a whole, but there's an unwillingness to accept that there's a problem. And then there's also what I observe, especially working with women, there's a pride in believing that you can do it all on your own and without assistance. In fact, I would say most of the women that I work with, there's a pride in the sense of nobody found out. I kept it under wraps. I kept it hidden, kept it secret for so long. And some part of that is shameful, but then some part of that is also there's some ego and some pride in that too. But part of what the barrier to treatment is the willingness to accept that you do not have it all. You do not have it all under control. This thing has gotten out from underneath you and life has become unmanageable. But that pride certainly gets in the way of most people seeking treatment, especially women seeking treatment. And I see the comment, someone says, I haven't done it yet. And that's certainly true. They come up with all the excuse and all the justifications of why they don't need help and that things could be worse, or, well, I haven't IV used yet, or I haven't gotten a DUI yet or had legal consequences yet. And so people will try to wait for a true crisis. But I mean, you know, being absent from your home is a crisis. Being emotionally unavailable is a crisis. Not being able to meet your goals and what you want to do in life. These are all crises. You don't have to wait until you're truly at the very bottom to accept help. Another treatment barrier that I observe is the support system. And more times than not, it's not because that is anything anybody means to do, but sometimes the families unfortunately get in the way of the loved one, of the addict and alcoholic receiving treatment. Families and loved ones, and the biggest reason for that is often they don't understand. They do not understand addiction. And I will say more times than not, we get the woman, the addict alcoholic in treatment, she doesn't understand either. And so if she doesn't understand and she's in the midst of it, of how addiction works, how it operates in the brain, why it's so powerful, why it's so addictive, why you can't do it on your own, that is really hard. We can't expect the families to understand that either. And later we'll go into the importance of treating the whole system and not just the patient. And families unknowingly enable use. They don't mean to, but some of the ways they do this is they give excuses. I observe that families become the PR agent for their loved one to the family system. And they try to smooth things over or find reasons and rationale and all those things. I see family members give them money. I see them give excuses and all these things. And the difference between men and women is I've watched people and family members be way more harsh and tough love with men than they are with women. Getting the woman to treatment, sometimes the family become a barrier because they don't want to be cruel. And oftentimes there's a sense of fragility with women, and they say, well, I don't know if she can handle it. I don't know if this is going to take her out. I don't know if she's mentally or emotionally strong enough for this intervention or for us to make this decision. And so overall, families' lack of knowledge and understanding and their enabling behaviors become treatment barriers. And I would say probably this last one is the greatest one of all, which is a treatment barrier, which is shame. Because of that more emotionally driven nature in women, they are more prone to feelings of shame associated with use. And there's a deep shame that positive things in their life weren't enough to keep them sober or to stop their use. When we get them into treatment, a huge part of that is better understanding the addictive process, better understanding powerlessness and unmanageability. But before they come into treatment and while they're in treatment, reduction of that shame is a massive part of it. But the concept, especially with women, is why weren't my kids enough? What kind of mother am I that I used even though it was affecting my kids, even though I couldn't be physically present or I was emotionally unavailable or I've disrupted their lives? What kind of person am I and what kind of mother am I that I would do that? And that shame alone keeps a lot of women from entering treatment. The inability to accept, but that is the reality, unfortunately, and the understanding of the addictive process, to know that there's a sense of powerlessness here. That shame is very, very deep in women. And it's not just the shame of my kids weren't enough. It could be that my family wasn't enough, my marriage wasn't enough, my career wasn't enough. I have such a great family support. Why was I willing to give all of that away? That shame, 100%, is probably one of the biggest barriers to treatment. So those are the treatment barriers that we've looked at. And so as we move on and we treat women, these are the areas of focus, especially at a Reprieve for Women. These are the things that we focus on. We focus on mental health, we focus on trauma, we focus on shame reduction, stabilizing the family system, acceptance of limitation, and probably the most important yet the hardest one to do, which is building a community with other women. So let's take a look at that mental health. So best practices in working with women and providing mental health in the treatment process. I think there are three parts of this that are important to look at, which is psychiatric care and medication maintenance, individual therapy that focuses on coping tools, and then individual therapy that focuses on acceptance of emotions, acceptance of reality, acceptance of the things that are happening, and then also living within a personal value system. So when we treat mental health, and we especially look at the psychiatric side of things, A lot of women need that extra help when they get into treatment. There's a lot of depression, there's a lot of anxiety, and medications are necessary in the early parts because it's really challenging to do the other work that you need to do in treatment if you're riddled with depression and you can't even get out of bed, or you're so anxious and caught up in repetitive thoughts or intrusive thoughts. You can't get to the other work or get to the 12-step work that needs to be done if these mental health pieces are getting in the way. And so a lot of times medication is a necessary component of treatment, especially early on. A lot of times in those 6 to 12 months that women are with us, what we see is that they start off with medications, they get better, their families get better, they strengthen themselves, they really connect with the 12-step program, they learn and practice effective coping tools, and they can titrate and come off of several of the medications that they're on. So it's not something necessarily that has to be considered forever, but it is an important part, especially early on. And then we work with women who just have more significant mental health issues. And they have to probably be on medications for a much more longer period of time, if not forever. And so there's no shame in the med game. And getting people to understand that is sometimes challenging. The funniest thing to me is this is men and women, they will come to treatment. We'll start saying, hey, you may need to consider something to help with this depression and this anxiety, or your moods are still kind of all over the place. I really think something to stabilize that is going to be really important so you can do this other work. And by and large, they will say, I'm not putting that, I don't know what that is. I'm not putting that medication in my body. And it's just such a funny reaction because it's like, you were doing IV med before you came here. I think it's okay if you take a little Prozac. And so, but fighting through those barriers, those are all justifications because no one likes to think of themselves as mentally ill or needing that kind of help. And so breaking through that stigma is important too. What I would say also for those of you that are treating women is to understand the need and the access for good psychiatric care. There is a massive, I don't know what it's like in other states, but in the state of Alabama, there's not great access to a lot of psychiatric services. And sometimes the wait time to even get in with the psychiatrist can be 4 or 5 months. And I think it's important and pertinent to have resources available. And when you're treating women and you know this is a part of their history, getting them appointments and going ahead and getting that referral in process. And that's an important piece because sometimes it's a lengthy process. And on top of that, it can take a lot of time to find the medication that works best for the mental health that you're experiencing, mental health symptoms you're experiencing. We've come a long way. There are some types of genetic testing that can be done that can determine based off of your genetic makeup what medications, SSRIs, SNRIs work best with your genetic makeup. And so that's come a long way, but sometimes you can be a little bit of a lab rat trying to figure it all out. But best practices are accountability for medication maintenance, and especially those that have significant mental health, they're going to have to take medications, a significant amount of medications post-treatment. It is the accountability, helping them learn how to take their medications and take them regularly. Because an unfortunate hallmark characteristic of medications, of women and medications and treatment is, especially those with significant mental health issues, is the inconsistency in taking the medication. They take it for a period of time, they get better, and then they stop it because they feel better, and then they get cycled back into some negative mental health consequences. Another part of best practices when we're working with mental health is individual therapy to focus on building effective coping tools. I find two of the best things to work on and that we do at the Women's Reprieve is cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. CBT is where we are looking at those thought processes and the behaviors that follow, and can we learn different tools to challenge negative thinking, reframe thoughts, to show up for those thoughts differently. And if we can change our relationship to our thoughts, usually our behaviors follow suit. And then with dialectical behavioral therapy, it was born and bred out of actually treating borderline personality individuals. However, I love it because it is practical, rational, logical coping tools that are easy to access, easy to understand, and easy to use. And so we do a lot of that work here. And I think that's one of the best ways to, because people get lost in the weeds of like, I've heard about coping tools and I was taught a couple of things, but I don't know how to use them. And so a high focus is what are the tools that you can use and how can you do them regularly. And then the individual therapy to focus on just acceptance of emotions. We sometimes expect women to be a lot more emotionally intelligent than their male counterparts. And what I observe in women coming into treatment is a lot of times the disease has created such a disconnect from self that the ability to even correctly identify an emotion is a challenge. And often to also identify what's the correct emotion. Some women experience depression for so long that that's kind of the word that they'll use for actually a lot of different emotional experiences that they're having. Or I'm so anxious, when the truth and the reality is, yeah, they may be anxious, but also they're uncertain, or they're feeling a lot of shame, or they feel like they need to confront something but don't know how, or even that they're angry. And so a big part of this is just understanding what your emotional experience is, being able to put correct words with correct feelings. That sounds simple, but that's a hard, emotion 101 is a hard process in working with women when they first get sober, because the disease has just robbed the ability to really be emotionally healthy. And we find that people tend to be surrendered in emotional maturity at the age of their onset of use. And a lot of people start using when they're adolescents. And what we see is when they get into treatment, is that they present very either childlike or like adolescents. And so it takes a minute to develop these skills. One of the best ways, tools that I like, or therapy modalities I like to use in acceptance of emotions, is acceptance and commitment therapy. It teaches you to get out of the struggle of dealing with emotions, and can you identify what it is and just accept that it's happening. And then we use coping tools as a support. What most addicts and alcoholics get into is they're used to instant gratification, and they're used to getting rid of an emotion very quickly. If we're not careful, sometimes they'll use coping tools to ditch emotions really quickly, when it's actually more pertinent and important for them to learn to identify and sit through the discomfort. Because these women cannot, nobody experiences addiction. You can't be sober if you can't be uncomfortable. And so when we look at mental health and treating that in the treatment process, that part is really important. Is say, can you identify these emotions, and can you allow yourself to experience it and know that it doesn't last forever, and then use appropriate coping tools when necessary to move through it. The next thing that we look at in best practices for while women are in treatment is trauma. I think it's important for people to be trauma informed, informed of different treatment approaches. Listed below are just some different types of individual therapy that incorporate one or more of the following research-based therapeutic approaches. So these are different types of treatment modalities and approaches that are used to treat trauma. If you're working with a woman and you know that there's some trauma going on and that she needs to be able to address that through the course of treatment, it's important to either have these trainings, or if you know that this need is there and you don't have that training, to be able to make appropriate referrals. I think one of the most important things clinicians can do is to know when you're outside the scope of your practice. I'll have clients sometimes that come in with eating disorders, and a lot of work we can do to manage what's going on. However, there's also a period of time in which they need that more focused care, and therefore we kind of utilize an outsourced resource to be able to do that. So it's really important to know what's the needs of the clients and what's the best way to get that met. But here are some of the research-based therapeutic approaches for treating trauma. EMDR, which is that eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's where you identify the trauma memory and you use bilateral stimulation to lower the distress of what happened and shift the negative beliefs about self. Cognitive behavioral therapy, and then trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That is just where you are looking at the thoughts and the cognitions that are a part of the trauma, as well as the behaviors that are ramping up with the trauma, and using those CBT coping tools and reframing and all those things in order to treat trauma. The next one is internal family systems, and that is a type of trauma that focuses on parts work, meaning that there's different parts of us, our personalities, how our minds and our bodies react to trauma. And so IFS is a model that focuses on treating those parts and not just focusing on the emotional aspect, but also focusing on how those are experienced in the body. The next one is cognitive processing therapy. I think the previous presenter talked about a lot of these too, so it's exciting to kind of see some consistency throughout that when we're talking about not just treating veterans, but women. Trauma is a universal thing across the board that people experience, not just in these specific populations. But CPT is where you kind of evaluate and learn how to change upsetting thoughts. It's typically done in a very specific setting over the course of 12 sessions. It follows a very specific model. Next one is prolonged exposure therapy. It's exactly what it sounds like, which is a gradual approach and a gradual to those trauma memories, those trauma feelings, and just slowly kind of reintegrating it and get out of the avoidance of it, because the avoidance tends to cause more trauma and triggers and mental health symptoms. And then narrative exposure therapy, it focuses on that we all have stories that we tell ourselves. And so through the narrative and writing process, you learn different ways to contextualize your story and your experience. Trauma becomes more refined and it becomes more understood as a result. So treating trauma is a big part of treating women. The next thing we look at in best practices is shame reduction. I would say this is incredibly important because it's important to create environments that are relational and supportive, especially with women. And it's important. What we do in Women's Retreat is we have this thing that we call, it's called spiritual license, which just means that within the group and within the community, we have spiritual license with one another. And what that means is when I provide feedback, so a lot of things are done in a group setting. When I provide feedback and when I share something that I think is important, or I give some, if I tell you some way that you're showing up that maybe you can't see for yourself, no one is sharing that information out of spite. No one's sharing that information out of retaliation. Everything is shared for the sole desire and purpose for you to get better. As a result of that, we share that with these women. This is how we operate in the group setting together. It reduces the shame. Therefore, they can be a lot more open and vulnerable and honest and get to those pieces that are very hard to say out loud. It's also important to create an environment where vulnerability is rewarded as well as validated. And then just honest and direct feedback and support. Shame messages get really stuck in the head. And so using direct language, direct feedback, and a supportive environment helps shame, which helps women move forward more quickly and helps them engage in their treatment process more effectively. Another part of best practices in working with women is to stabilize the family system. If you treat the addict, but you don't treat the family, then they go back to their family system and everything kind of unravels from there. And so it's important to provide information for the family system so they can have support and counseling and education about the addiction process. We do a family program as a part of our program once a quarter. And I always tell families this thing every time, which is there's nothing more sadder than watching the addict and alcoholic get better and the family doesn't. Because what happens is you're creating an environment for resentment. What families will say is all they want is for the loved one to get better. That's all that they want. But then when they do, the families often don't do their own work. They've not dealt with their own traumas from this experience. And as a result, they become resentful. They don't want to. That's not the role that they want to carry. That's inevitably by default what happens if the family doesn't do their own work. So what we do is we encourage families to do their own work, whether that is through an individual therapist or a support group like Al-Anon or Narcan-On, or maybe their church has some type of program that they feel connected to. It's really, really valuable and important for the families to know your loved one, your daughter, your wife, whomever, she can get sober today and she can be sober the rest of her life. The unfortunate piece is you will not, that does nothing for the things you've already experienced up until this point. And so they have to, it's important for them to be around people that understand what they're going through as well. The families can never understand what the addict and alcoholic goes through. The addict and alcoholic can never understand what the families go through. And so everyone having their own help is important. Family involvement through the treatment process is pertinent because they need to practice healthy communication. They need to practice resolving conflict. They need to practice how do we build trust in the things that have happened. And so working with one another in the session, that's really important. Not just as you're a provider or a therapist or whomever, increased knowledge and understanding of addiction as a family disease and understanding that this affects everyone. I kind of liken it to, and I give this analogy a lot, it's kind of like a train wreck. And what happens is there's a massive train wreck, everything's everywhere, and the addict alcoholic is pulled, life-flighted out of the situation and put elsewhere. The sad thing is that the family is left with all of the destruction. They're left with all of the chaos. They're left with everything that's left behind, and they need help and education and understanding of how to work through all of that. So stabilizing the family system is a really important process. If you're a provider, knowing in your area the resources that help families, or even starting a resource that helps families is important. Another part of best practices is acceptance of limitations, using reality-based treatment approaches, learning coping tools to identify and get your needs met, and learning to ask for and accept help. In working with women, they are terrible at that. They want to believe they can do it all. That concept of a super mom or a superwoman, it really resonates in the brain. And it is a journey in treatment to help them understand you have limitations. There is only so much that you can do. You are going to have to ask for help and break that pride and break that ego to be able to do so. Because nobody gets better in a bubble. Everything in the addictive treatment process is done in group settings. That's because it's important for people to be able to relate to one another, and you need to see you're not terminally unique. You're not the only one going through this thing. And so it's really important overall that women learn how to ask for help. Building a community with other women. Gender-specific treatment is very helpful for this. There has to be a lot of knowledge and understanding how to break through the stereotypes of how women connect with one another. I was reading this thing the other day that talked about how men and women, the differences in how they work together. You put men in a group setting, and initially they're going to fight to find out kind of who the alpha is in the situation. But then after that's figured out, they bond and they create a brotherhood. Women, it's a bit different. You put them in a group together. Initially, they're going to be very kind and very pleasant and accommodating to one another, but they struggle the longer you go throughout the treatment process. And that's just the difference in men and women. It doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means there's a different way we have to go about getting women to connect with one another. And just openly process through any barriers that prevent women from connecting with other women. I don't know if you've had these experiences, but by and large, we have a fraction of women that will come in saying, I don't really like other women. I don't really connect with them well. I'm kind of, I get along better with men. And that very well may be true, but the men are not going to save you in this program. It's going to be the other women. And so learning how to create a sisterhood of sense, that's not natural and organic to a lot of women. And so breaking through those stereotypes, and women are societally bred to be in competition with one another. And so learning to work together and break through all these perceptions that women are given over time, it's a huge part of this process. So what works? To me, supportive treatment environments work, knowledgeable staff, a holistic treatment approach. This is important to me because I think with women, it is important to be direct and do not shy away from confronting issues. I tend to be conflict avoidant myself, and in working in this field in residential care, I just by and large see once you develop the rapport, women can handle being directly talked to, and in fact, they appreciate it more. We tend to be used to, kind of softening the blow or putting it in a way that is kind of digestible, but usually that makes a more vague situation and it becomes unclear of what you're really wanting or needing. And so really being direct, confronting issues, calling women out, I think that's an important part of this process. But I will say, do not do it a moment before you've developed rapport. It will not work. It is important to have that rapport, and then you can show up in those ways and hold that space for them. Also, massively important, what works is addressing the co-occurring issues that present themselves once the woman is sober. Men do this too, but with women, what I see is you take the drugs and alcohol away, and you're going to start seeing issues pop up like eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors, sex and love addiction, reaching out and using people for validation, shopping, gambling, all of these things that are a part of the addictive process. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole in treatment. Once you put the substance use aside, these other things pop up too. And so What works is being able to be knowledgeable and to be able to address the co-occurring issues. Sometimes we can do all of that in-house, but sometimes that requires a referral out, not from the program necessarily, but to get all of the treatment and all of the issues that are needed. These are things that work. What doesn't work are harsh tactics without rapport, like I said earlier. Invalidating past experiences does not work. Shame-based approaches, I think, earlier models of treatment and recovery with substance use, it was very much focused on tough love. And I think that probably works for men more than it does for women. So these approaches that tend to be a little more shame-based, a little harsh, very tough love, that doesn't work as well for women. And so kind of softening the approach just a little bit until you can build the rapport, and then just using honest, reality-based treatment approaches works best. Ignoring the real challenges that women face in getting help, that does not work. It's important to get women to treatment, but sometimes they need to hear, yeah, that's a barrier. That's a hardship. I don't know how you're doing it. This is very challenging, and not saying, well, that doesn't matter. Don't focus on that. Focus on yourself. Women tend to do a lot better if you can validate the experiences that they're having and then move them through those processes. Treating the client without considering providing resources for the family, that does not work. And a lack of consideration in the gender differences in the needs of treatment. These are all things in my experience of treating, especially women and men. When we work with women, this is kind of the differences that we see. Lastly, I want to leave you with is the role of the providers in the community. So you may find yourself say, what do we do? How do we show up? I may not work in a residential treatment setting, but like, what do we do? How do we help women, and how do we help women in addiction? The first thing is to have knowledge and information for necessary resources. That may be treatment facilities, different types of programs that not only provide treatment, but provide accurate and appropriate assessments for treatment placement. Knowing the 12-step groups in town, whether it's AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, things like this. Knowing the prevention programs in town, or being active in prevention programs yourself. They say a lot of times prevention is one of the best treatments for addiction and recovery. You see it a lot in adolescent programs and things like that, but knowing what they are and being active and involved in those. And then family programs and support groups. So if you're an individual in your community, you're a therapist, or you're a social worker, or you're a nurse practitioner, whoever, if you're here and you work with this population, I would say have knowledge and information ready to give women that may be struggling in this way. I would also say support local facilities that treat addiction. If there are fundraisers, or if there are events that promote recovery, doing whatever is necessary to advocate and lift up those types of services, because they're needed and they're necessary. As I said at the beginning, there are far more treatment options for men than there are for women. Support causes that provide education and events that destigmatize the substance use. This is self-education. You yourself kind of knowing more about addiction. What are the signs? What are the symptoms? What are the needs in treatment? And I hope that you guys have gotten a little bit of that today, and you can carry these things with you. And lastly, I'll say, if you are treating women and you see the need, and you see that they're going to need more, and that they're going to need either detox, or they're going to need something a little bit more than a 12-step community. We, as the Women Reprieve Always Exist, we're a 6 to 12-month residential treatment program for women struggling with substance use. It's 2 parts. It is a 12-step immersion where they are guided through all 12 steps in their stay with us. They're also provided mental health, trauma treatment, and they work with a nurse practitioner to get the medications that they need. And so a lot of times, those are all the things that people need in order to be sober. And so we do all of that in kind of one setting, because sometimes it's really challenging to do all of that on an outpatient basis. Some people function really well in 12-step groups. Some people function really well in outpatient programs, but you're always going to come across the people that are going to need a little bit more, need that dual diagnosis care. So we are here and exist. A lot of programs you'll find are completely 12-step focused or completely mental health focused. We're this kind of myriad of thing in the middle. So if you're treating someone and you see the need and the understanding that they may need that, keep us in mind. We love working with women. We love working with families, and we're here to help in any way possible. So I really appreciate being here today. I really appreciate y'all's attentiveness and just the willingness to hear more about addiction, and especially in these specialty populations. So thank you guys, and we'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Hello. There we go. Hi, my name is Angel, and I worked for Bradford for a long time in a bunch of different ways. And I work a lot now with LGBTQIA plus community. There are a lot of ways to say that. There's a lot of acronyms. For today, we're going to use primarily LGBTQIA plus or LGBTQ, but there are a lot of different acronyms, and we'll kind of talk about the differences and why that's important. All right, so one thing that is going to be important kind of as we're looking at these statistics is the limitations of these statistics. A lot of these data points were only, they've just recently been gathered. Some of them have only been gathered in the past few years, so there's very little, if long-term data. And they're also, most of them were taken from convenience samples. And so they are typically, there's different percentages, which you find that across substance abuse in general, just because of the difficulty in getting some of those percentages. And so specifically with LGBTQ in general, and also with addiction, and then you put them together, and there's a lot of differing percentages. So we're looking at what we can best guess at this point. There's also a lot of hesitancy for many people to self-disclose about a lot of this data. For fear of stigmatization, they don't know how it's going to be used. And so with that, there are a lot of different, there are a lot of people who think the statistics are probably greater. All right, so prevalence and statistics. We're going to use the term sexual minority for anybody who is not considered a cisgendered heterosexual. So what that means is cisgendered is their gender identity aligns with the sex that they were aligned at birth. And so a cisgender in a heterosexual relationship would be somebody who was born a male and somebody who was born a female, and then they're in a sexual relationship. Or they consider themselves heterosexual. So looking at this, anytime anybody else or any other kind of sexuality is going to be considered a sexual minority. So 41.3% of sexual minority adults reported marijuana use this past year, as compared to 18.7% of the overall adult population. 6.7% of sexual minority adults misused opiates, as opposed to 3.6%. 21.8% of sexual minority adults had an alcohol use disorder in the past year, compared to 11% in the overall population. So what you're going to see is, in general, the statistics are much higher in the LGBTQ community. All right, so in a report released from SAMHSA in 2021 and 2022, they found that the usage of minority males and females were 2 to 3 times larger than straight male females to have used illicit drugs other than marijuana. About 1/3 of bisexual females, bisexual males, and gay males had been diagnosed with some form of substance use disorder, and about 1/4 of lesbian females had a substance use disorder in the past year. Bisexual females were 3 times more likely than straight females to have an opioid use disorder in the past year. So what we are finding is there are a wide variety of statistics on this, but also note that a lot of these studies are only studying, they're studying straight, they're studying bisexual, or they're studying traditionally gay individuals. There are very few studies on some of the other different sexualities and gender specifics. All right, so sexual minority adults were at least twice as likely as straight adults to misuse stimulants. Gay males were twice as likely as bisexual males, and about 15 times as likely as straight males to have used inhalants in the past year, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Lesbian and bisexual females were more likely than straight females to engage in binge drinking in the past month, and twice as likely to engage in heavy drinking, which there's also some reasons for that as well, which we're going to talk about. All right, so culture and addiction. A big part of this is when we're looking at the LGBTQ community, there are a lot of reasons why substance use and especially alcohol use disorders are in this particular field. Alcohol has been a huge part of the LGBTQ community for many years, specifically with gay bars. So history and culture of drinking due to history. So a lot of times, if you look at the history of, you know, LGBTQ people, there are only specific places, and still, sometimes even now, there are still only very specific places that they feel comfortable to be themselves. Or legally, they couldn't be out and openly gay. And so one of the primary places they could go is gay bars, very specific gay bars, or places that were not, were known to be safe bars that were for these people. So if you think about it, the Stonewall riots, and if you don't know about that, look it up. It's really important in the LGBTQ community. But that was at a bar, and it was a bar that was rated. And so if you look at the history, alcohol has been a huge part of the culture. And also lack of support can lead to finding alternative support. A lot of times with LGBTQ communities, which we'll see, if there is not like family support or those kind of things, they're going to look other places. And a lot of times that is at bars, because it's one of the places that a lot of people feel like can go, and they feel that they can be themselves. And so also another cultural thing, as you kind of look at these different statistics, is there's a lot of, within the female community, there are higher percentages of some of these things. And part of that some of the theories with that are the combination of sexism that they're having to experience and homophobia that these women face. And so that's not just going to be, that's going to be anybody who identifies as a woman, as a female. It's not going to be just biologically born females. And so you're also looking at sexism, you're looking at homophobia, you're looking at trauma and sexual assault, which we're going to talk about that as well. All right, so let's talk about culture and sex. And this is not something that is often talked about, even in clinical settings. And so this is it's a big part sometimes of the community, and we need to kind of talk about it. So the use of inhalants. It's prevalent in anal sex, which relaxes muscles, but it's not limited to gay males. And actually, there's a lot of studies and there's a lot of conversations that this is actually becoming a bigger part of overall in national for use with sex. It's not just with gay males. And so with that, it's something that we need to be aware of as clinicians, especially clinicians in substance abuse, because this can lead to other drugs. It can be fatal if it's ingested. Although these inhalants are often called poppers, and they're technically illegal for non-prescribed use, but they're often you can get them at almost any gas station, and if not gas stations, you can get them at sex stores. You can get them a lot of different places. They are disguised as other things. They can be disguised as leather cleaner, room deodorizer, and you can get them legally online. So people can order them. They can order them online. And with this is something when you're looking at, treatment going forward, when you're looking about discharging patients, sometimes there needs to be some sex education, especially with the LGBTQ community, about what are some other alternatives, because this one can be dangerous. Stigmatism. We know that there's stigmatism here. A lot of, and we see this more and more and more, we're seeing it often. A lot of the rights have been limited or denied in many places around the country. There's a lot of differing religious views of LGBTQ people. There's fears of judgment and bigotry within treatment facilities from staff or other patients. This, while working at Bradford and Madison, I would often find this particular thing with patients. They weren't, sometimes, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the treatment part, but a lot of times patients would come in and they would not kind of be honest on the front end, because they were afraid that if they said certain things that they would get a lot of judgment or bigotry. And some of them because they had experienced that in other treatment facilities. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Stigma about addiction. So you've got the stigma about being a part of the LGBTQIA community. You've got stigma about addiction and internalized homophobia. So internalized homophobia is complicated feelings and judgment on yourself about those, about being gay. And so maybe a lot of people, maybe they grew up with religious or parents that don't believe in that. And so they end up hating themselves, or they deny the fact that they are gay. They deny the fact that they do have these feelings. And that can become a very prominent issue that affects their substance use. And a lot of times people don't realize that. It can be something that they discover later in life. It can be something that they don't realize they have, but it does become part of the treatment process. It becomes part of the healing process, is having to kind of address that, which can be really hard for a lot of people. Other challenges from stigmatization, discrimination, hate crimes, emotional abuse, threats, public humiliation or ridicule. If you think about it, there's a lot of fear and sometimes just walking out with your partner. So if you have a partner and you may walking out with a partner, maybe you feel like you can't hold hands. Maybe you feel like you can't look like you're gay in public because you feel like you're going to be abused. You feel like you're going to be, there's going to be a hate crime against you. You feel like there's going to be some kind of discrimination in the place that you're going. Those things carry a huge weight. And so they bring those things into treatment as well. Rejection or shame from family or friends, lack of access to healthcare, such as gender affirming care, and loss of employment or not receiving promotions. Oftentimes employers are not going to call it that, but there definitely can be those issues. And so finding a workplace environment that is accepting of you, that has discrimination laws within their company to protect you, those things are important, because some places are going to say, even if you think about dress code, they're going to have very specific things that you can and cannot do. And so those things can be limiting to people who are transgender. Those things can be limiting to people who are non-binary. And those things can lead to, lack of acceptance and loss of employment. All right, treatment access issues. Only 7.4 of programs offer specialized services for LGBTQ patients. That is nationwide. And those are just programs. So that's not even like looking at very specific, this is a rehab that is specifically for LGBTQ people. That's just programs that offer specialized services. And that as we'll see in a minute, that causes a lot of problems, because there is strong, significant data that shows that people that are LGBTQ, that if they're in a specialized program that has other LGBTQ people around them, they have a greater likelihood of being able to stay sober. And so only 7.4 programs in the United States offer those kind of specialized services. And those specialized services can become a huge asset. I know that about 10 years ago, I was looking for a treatment center for somebody who is a part of the LGBTQ community, and there were very limited options. We did find one, but again, the waiting list was really long, in order to get there. It was very expensive because they were out of state. And so this can become a huge issue because people don't want to, there's a lot of, they're afraid of stigma among their peers. They're afraid of stigma among staff, which we're going to talk about. Also, until recently, uninsured statistics for LGBTQIA+ were higher than the national average. And also, statistically, more likely, LGBTQ+ people are also more likely than non-LGBTQ+ people to have lower incomes. So if you look at that, with 44% of LGBTQIA+ people earning less than 200% of federal earning less than 200% of the federal poverty level, as compared to 36% of non-LGBT+ people. So those are some pretty significant differences, which then can provide limitations and even be able to see treatment access, which we know across the board is hard for people who are that are in this, anybody who's in the recovery community. It can be hard to get that access. All right, so treatment access issues. Limited inpatient treatment, housing, and bathroom options, which we're going to talk about, often have biologically assigned gender group therapy and group placement only, lack of non-binary housing or group therapy options, and lack of transgender housing or group therapy options. These are significant barriers when you're looking at inpatient treatment. When we were looking at this at Bradford and Madison, we looked at a lot of different options. I had a lot of conversations with transgender adults who were fearful about coming out and saying that they were transgender. They were fearful about telling me what their pronouns were. In their intake documents, they didn't answer the pronoun section because they had been places where they were assigned that they had to go in this community because that's what they were biologically born as. And so looking at bathroom options, I have a transgender sister. Bathroom options become very difficult out in public. They become difficult when you're looking at treatment access. And that is a huge, unless there are specific things that are in place for those people. And it's something that we don't always think about, but it becomes a really big thing. I know that my sister, she doesn't go out in the bathroom public unless she knows that there is a single, like a family bathroom that has a single stall and has a locked door because of these issues. So looking at inpatient treatment, if you're looking at how are we going to help this community, looking at, what are our housing options? What are our bathroom options? Looking at what do your groups look like? A lot of times we have gendered group therapy. So you've got the males who do this and the females who do this. But oftentimes, in the LGBT community, they may not feel comfortable in that, it may be that they feel stigmatized by their biological gender. It may mean that they feel like they relate better to the opposite sex. And so with that, what we did at Bradford was oftentimes we'd have, if we thought that might be a part of it might be part of their story, we would bring them in, we'd have a one-on-one conversation with them, making sure that they felt safe, and ask them, hey, what are your pronouns? Which we're going to talk in detail later. What kind of group do you feel most comfortable with? And so we would have those conversations, and we would put them, if they felt more aligned with a specific group, we would let them do therapy with the group. As far as rooming goes, a lot of times we'd give them their own room, so that which is not always an option, depending on your inpatient treatment. The way Madison and Bradford, it was, 2 beds, 1 bathroom. So we did have that option. A lot of times we would give them their own room, we'd give them their own bathroom, so they didn't have to worry about that. And then we would talk to them about which groups did they feel more comfortable doing group therapy in. Also, lack of non-binary housing or group therapy options. So for somebody who's non-binary, they may feel that they share both masculine and female traits. They may feel that they're not any, they're kind of separate from that. And so those questions can be really hard. And there's not a lot of non-binary housing or treatment access. So having those conversations is really important, of asking, okay, where do you feel most comfortable? What can we do to kind of help make sure that this treatment is helpful for you, that you feel the most comfortable? There are things that are being made now, which is kind of cool. There are more non-binary treatment options. There's more transgender treatment options that are developing, but there are still very limited. All right, so mental health and comorbidity. So as you've seen in the other presentations, within all these different groups, including if you in addiction, we know in general they're more likely to have other kinds of mental health issues. So sexual minority females are about 2 to 3 times more likely than straight females to have another mental illness. Sexual minority females are more than twice as likely than straight males to have both another mental illness and a substance use disorder. And so looking at that, these are things you've got to consider too, because there are lots of different, just like every other group that we've talked about, looking at the mental health, making sure, like Leah said, that they were not misdiagnosed, because there are a lot of varying things that happen when they come to treatment. Depression and suicide. Okay, this is a huge part of treating people in the LGBTQIA+. We've seen it with LGBTQIA youth. We see it with adults. Bisexual females are 6 times more likely to have attempted suicide in the past year. Bisexual males were 3 times more likely than straight males to have thoughts of suicide. Gay males were more than twice as likely to have thoughts of suicide than straight males. And so the 2015 National Transgender Survey, so that is the last time that was analyzed. They just finished collecting the 2022 data, and it's being analyzed now. So this is even though this is an old data, it's what we have. It's what we have. So at the time, 40% of transgender people had attempted suicide in a lifetime, nearly 9 times the rate of the US population. And LGBTQ+ youth are 4 times higher to attempt suicide than adolescent national average. This is something that has to be considered when you're looking at treatment. I'm talking about depression, trying to make sure you're checking in, making sure that you're asking when you're doing, your biopsychosocials, asking questions about, have you had these thoughts? Have you attempted? Have you been hospitalized for these things? But this is a huge part of treatment, because we've got to address it. We've got to make sure that we're asking the questions, and we've got to make sure we're giving the coping skills when they leave, because of these high statistics, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. All right, sexual assault is also really high. So nearly 1 in 10 LGBTQ survivors of intimate partner violence have experienced sexual assault from those partners. So there is a higher, statistically, there is a higher intimate partner violence statistic within couples in the LGBTQ community. But there's also a higher sexual assault statistic in general. Studies show that around half of transgender people and bisexual women will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetimes. And these are just a few of the stats. There are a lot of stats about this, about the sexual assault rates. And so these are more about the sexual assault rates. They are all over the map. So, 44% of lesbians and 61% of bisexual women experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. You kind of look down, you can see that the stats are high. The stats are high as with sexual violence. You see that they're high with interpartmental violence all across the board. All right, so proven therapeutic techniques. These are all proven with a specific population. CBT, which both Bree talked about and Leah talked about, that's a huge proven technique. Motivational interviewing, which we use typically in addiction treatment overall, but that is specifically helpful with LGBTQ, within the LGBTQ community. Contingency management, which is also, it's kind of an incentivized treatment, but that has also been proven, and social support therapy. And we're going to talk about that particular thing as we go. Social support we know is important for anybody who is trying to get sober. Within the LGBTQ community, this becomes even more prevalent for many reasons, which we're going to talk about. All right, so these are important noted factors for successful treatment with LGBTQIA+ people. Strong indicator of the need for cultural competence clinicians. And we're going to talk about some of the biases that can happen there. Making sure that they have clinicians that understand some of the differences, that are asking the right questions, but not asking questions that could be discriminatory or offensive. Because if you have somebody who is not a clinician that is not culturally competent, you can actually have a lot of damage and more trauma that can happen. And also, people may not feel like they can open up. And as we know, if people don't open up, we can't deal with the actual issues. We cannot deal with the substance abuse issues. A strong indicator for LGBTQ specific programs, which we talked about, and a strong indicator of the need to have and build sober family or peer support. This becomes a huge thing, because a lot of times, and we'll talk about like some things that can happen with family or things that can happen with friends, depending on where they are. There may not be a lot of LGBTQ plus people in their lives. They may not see a lot of that. And so the need for sober family and peer support becomes larger. There are a lot of growing support groups for LGBTQ people. There are, if you look at the AA and NA websites, if you're looking at specific meetings for your people, you know, a lot of times we print them out as we're discharging, or we're looking at, you know, outpatient treatment, those kind of things. If you look for that little indicator, you can find groups that are either specifically for LGBTQ people, or they are LGBTQ allies. They are welcoming. There is also a great website, which I'll talk about later, which you can actually, it's called Gay and Sober, and they have taken a look nationwide and looked at specific groups for people in the community. So it helps them build you know, the sober peer support within people who are sober within the LGBTQ community. All right, so family special considerations. This is a big part of treatment, right? You know, we talked about, Leah talked about, you know, how the family, and I love how she talked about that, you know, kind of working with the family, and also like, you know, because that becomes you know, families are the biggest protective, or they can be the biggest risk factor for LGBTQIA children, adolescents, and adult success. And we know this. So if families are super supportive, that is a huge protective factor. If they're not, it becomes a huge risk factor for suicide. It becomes a big risk factor for additional mental illness. It can become for trauma. It is all over the map. So LGBTQ plus young adults with supportive families increase the likelihood of perceived happiness in adulthood. LGBTQIA plus young adults with unsupportive families increase the likelihood for depression, attempted suicide, having unprotected sex, and a higher likelihood of using drugs. In general, for anybody who works with adolescents or has adolescents, we know that since social media has started, statistically, the suicide rate has exponentially grown. And that's across the board. That's not even looking just at the LGBTQ community, but it goes up within the LGBTQ community. And so this becomes a big proponent, not only for just substance abuse, but for mental health in general. All right, so family, special considerations. Make sure to do a detailed psychosocial family history to know the history of the relationship between the parents, the patient, and the family members. That's huge. We know that that is because if you don't want to start family therapy, if this person has, if there have been issues. So what is the current relationship the patient has with the family member? Are they supportive of their sexual orientation? Are they supportive of their gender? Were they previously shamed or ostracized by the family member? Has some of their trauma related to their family? These are all questions to consider before deciding to have family sessions, but before you decide to add somebody into their care plan. And sometimes these questions need to be asked specifically, because sometimes people will be open and honest about it. Sometimes people, just like anybody, they want that connection with their family. They want that connection. So they're hoping that maybe in those family sessions that they'll regain that. But asking the questions to know where you're starting, right? So to make sure that you're asking the questions, because it may not be appropriate at the beginning. It might be appropriate later once they have some coping skills. But, you know, one, as a clinician, you want to know what you're walking into. But also we want to make sure that we're being protective of our clients. Other special clinical considerations. Is the patient comfortable in having their family member as a part of the treatment process? It's something to always consider. Will having a family session or including the family at this stage of treatment process? So again, we need to look at where are we in the treatment process? Is it initial, inpatient, IOP, OP? Where are we in the treatment process? Because it may not be appropriate at the beginning, right? It may not be appropriate at the beginning, but it may be appropriate later down the road as you try to rebuild that support, as you try to rebuild those family units. Because you want to make sure, just like with any kind of, you know, we don't open trauma at the beginning of treatment, because we want to make sure they have one, that they're detoxed, but also that that they're at a place where they could even handle dealing with that, which comes much later. Will it bring up trauma too soon in the treatment process? Is it appropriate? I think that that's a question in general we always ask clinicians, like what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And that is especially true with looking at like which level of care are you at? Is it appropriate for this patient at this stage of treatment? Consider other sober support other than traditional family. So do they have a friend that's sober? Do they have a group that they have identified with that can be their support that may not be a part of the traditional family model? Looking for those support people to kind of include and maybe doing a family session. And if they don't, then if they don't have those, if they don't have supportive people, which a lot of people don't, we know a lot of people who come into treatment don't have that. And we also know that a lot of people who are part of the LGBTQ community don't have that. So making sure that that is a part of your discharge planning, right? You want to make sure that you're looking at how are we going to gain sober support, making sure that they're connecting with people that they're in treatment with, but also making sure that you are helping them in a way that they're going to be able to at least have the options of looking at different ways that they could get sober support. Helping family members connect with resources. There are a lot of parent resources out there. So family programs, Al-Anon, all these different support groups. I have a list here in just a minute of different ones, because sometimes families really want to be a part of the treatment process and they don't understand. And we know this across the board, not just with this, that, but it may not be appropriate right now, but you can give them resources. You can help them go through the family program. You can give them information on, how to be an ally. These are some support groups. Those things can be really helpful for the family. And honestly, even if the family is supportive, those are, who doesn't want more resources? Having those resources to give helps not only the family, and maybe that helps them be ready in the future for you guys to have that family session, or it can just be helpful in general so that they can either be ready or for them to have, so hopefully at some point that they'll be able to get there. All right, so these are all resources for families and practitioners. There's actually a lot out there. The Family Acceptance Progress. SAMHSA has a great practitioner's resource guide. Trevor Project. These are all PFLAG. That's a huge one. It has a lot of resources for family and for people that are part of the LGBTQ community. Treatment family programs and all these different groups. All right, special considerations within this community and treatment. So sexual identity and sexual orientation are not the same thing. We know this as clinicians, but not everybody does. Gender identity is the inmost concept of self as male, female, or a blend of both or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. Sexual orientation, an inherent or immutable enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. And understanding the difference there is huge, because those become a part of the discussion as we go. Issues within the LGBTQIA plus communities, labels versus non. You're going to find a wide variety of opinions on, feeling the need to label themselves as, or feeling the need to not label themselves. And this is kind of a generalization, but there can be a difference in age. Sometimes the older communities don't want labels. Sometimes the younger ones do. And obviously that's not, 100% true across the board. But, just like in treatment, I know at Bradford, we often had, like with the women, sometimes the older woman and the younger woman would be at odds. This is one of those issues that can be an issue too, like labels versus non. And so just realizing that and asking the question, because we want to go with that patient, whatever that patient feels, that's what we're going with. All right, pronouns. This is not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of different pronouns, and we're not going to go over all the specifics, but we're going to talk about why they're important. All right, so one thing I hear a lot, and probably you do too, is I don't understand all the different pronouns. They do not make sense. That's okay. You don't have to understand it to respect it. It doesn't have to make sense to you. Respect the person and respect their pronouns. I saw this week a quote that I thought was really good and really powerful. And it said, using someone's pronouns is helping them. It's a protective factor in suicide. It is, and I think that that's really true, because you are respecting that person. You are showing that person that you care. If you think about it, like when we go to treatment, we ask people, what do you go by? You know, we use those names that they, you know, so if they say that they go by this other name, we're going to use that. We're going to use that name to make sure that they understand that we respect. Pronouns are the same thing. And it's okay. We're going to talk about it. It's okay if you don't get it right. And we'll talk about what that looks like. So using pronouns they identify with show respect and care, as well as help build some rapport. Ask the person if it's okay for you to use those pronouns in public. So they may be okay with talking to you about it as their clinician, but they may not want you to use that out in the community. And that's okay, because they may not be out for their families. They may still be getting used to it. And that's okay. Again, we're going to ask them what they're comfortable with, and we're going to go with that. Pronouns, don't assume you know their sexual identity or sexual orientation. Again, we don't want to make assumptions in general, and especially with this. And allow a safe place for people to be open and clarify their own pronouns later in treatment. I had a lot of conversations with people who would come in, and you know, we'd realize that maybe that might be a part of their identity, and so I'd bring them in, and we would and I'd ask them questions, and I had a lot of people with tears in their eyes when they realized that we did care, and we would use the pronouns that they felt safe with, because often they'd been to other treatment programs where they were not allowed to say that. They were not allowed to use their pronouns. They were put in groups that they weren't comfortable with. They had to go with their biological sex. And that it's hard to describe, but like the amount of shame that they would talk about, shame and fear, and just how people would, we often would see people start to open up and blossom in treatment when they realized it was going to be a safe place. And so let it be a place that's open to clarify their own pronouns later, because they may not feel comfortable putting it on the sheet, but they may later in treatment. They may feel more comfortable later. So letting them have that option, because a lot of times, very rarely would people put their pronouns on their intake sheets. We'd have to, like later in treatment, we would realize that was a part of their identity. All right, so if you make a mistake with pronouns, it's going to happen sometimes. If it's not something that you use all the time, just apologize for it and move on. Don't make it a bigger deal or make them feel like you have to make you feel better about it. It's okay. You know, my sister specifically, you know, she just loves that you're caring, and not everybody's going to feel that way. But just if you own it, apologize for it and move on. Educate yourself. It's not their job to educate you. You know, you need to seek professional training or resources. Them having to educate you can be re-traumatizing and exhausting, because they feel like they're having to explain themselves over and over and over again. So we want to be respectful of that. And so if you want more information, pronouns.org, that is a huge part of that. All right, so we talked about these two a little bit. We're going to kind of speed it up a little bit so we can get you guys out of here. One of the big things with inpatient treatment center considerations, ignorance or bigotry from other patients. You need to have policies in place for the safety of these patients. You know, all rules and policies should be addressed in orientation, intake, or the beginning of treatment, so that everybody knows up front what is going to be allowed and what is acceptable. And this is the opportunity for conversations and education. So if somebody is coming in as a transgender person and they're coming into a specific group, there can be a lot of mixed feelings about that. So it's an opportunity for education. It's an opportunity to have those conversations and define rules and consequences for harassment, abuse, slurs, bullying, and bigotry. Consider zero tolerance policies, because it's one thing, if they feel like there's no consequences, they're going to continue to do it. And so it's something to consider. All right, religious trauma. This is something that I deal with often. It is, and this is not just within the LGBTQ community. It is, statistics estimate right now that 1/3 of Americans will experience some kind of religious trauma at some point in their life. So specifically with LGBTQ people, we know about, you know, conversion therapy, differing religious beliefs. These are all a part of it. So religion and spirituality and recovery. So this can become one of the issues. Using of higher power in the 12 steps. Okay, so we know that there's higher power in the 12 step. That can be a really hard thing for somebody who has experienced religious trauma. And it can be hard for them to sit in groups that talk about a higher power, or if there are people in the group who are very specifically talking about God, that may be really traumatizing for them to sit through. And so having a conversation about what a higher power is, you know, a lot of times too, I know that at Madison Bradford, we had this Dharma recovery program book, which is a 12-step program, but it's with Dharma. And that got passed around amongst a lot of our LGBTQ patients. And that was really helpful for them because they were like, okay, well, I can still, you know, I can work in recovery and I can have a different understanding about what this is. But also, if you're in a group setting, set the group up for success. Be aware of differing views and beliefs in the group and the potential trauma related to this. Many a group, religion in general, whether you're looking at, you know, the LGBTQ population or not, there can be a lot of very strong opinions. So if you're in a group therapy, make sure you set that up for mutual respect and make sure that you're kind of holding everybody accountable to that. All right, so we talked about some of this stuff as far as transgender care, after care considerations, so potential housing issues, a high rate of housing insecurities, lack of housing or poor housing options, specifically among the LGBTQ+IA population, and some of these other things we talked about, fears of isolation, fears of, you know, potential support issues. All those things can be need to be considered when you're looking at aftercare considerations. The role of providers and communities in promoting access to care. A big part of this is we've talked about, you know, the need for more specialized programs, but training all staff. So you may have some people that are really well trained, and then you may have some people that are not trained at all. This is not specific with clinicians. Everybody who works there needs to have some kind of training on this. And then also, like, what are your policies on discrimination among your staff? Reminding staff that they don't have to understand it to respect it and enforce respect from other patients as well. And reminding them it is your job to make a safe place for everybody. And also just kind of reminding staff that stating their own personal, religious, or political arguments or belief to a patient that isn't affirming of the patient can be traumatizing and harmful. And you're going to have that. You have places that have lots of different staff members. So training is needed. All right, so clinical responsibility, we're not going to go through this, but basically with the ACA and with the NASW, there are very specific patient advocacy things that are a part of both of those different organizations. And so it basically states that we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not doing harmful practices, and we're also supporting these patients and advocating for their rights. All right, last thoughts. You want to be a safe place. So be a safe place for them. Because a lot of times they haven't had that, you know, and we know that as a part of addiction. But we want to be a safe place. So we want to be a place where they can come, they can say whatever it is that they need to say, that they feel like they can be honest and open. A lot of that's building that rapport, letting them know time and time again, allowing them to build that trust that you are a safe person, that you are not going to judge them, that you're not going to discriminate against them. You're not going to try to make them think in a certain way. And that takes some time, but it's really important. And this is a quote that a friend of mine who's a part of the LGBTQ community and a part of the recovery community said, and I thought it was really, really good. And I know it's a part of AA and NA in general, but when we do not accept ourselves, we cannot be sober. So this is a huge part of being a part of the LGBTQ community, because again, there's a lot of stigma, you know, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of homophobia, there's a lot of like, if other people don't accept you, can you accept yourself? There's shame, there's fear, there's all these kind of things. And so allowing them, you know, to start to try to accept themselves is a huge part of them eventually getting sober. And so that is something that takes time. It's not quick. It's not simple. And so we've got to allow them the space to do that, and then just encourage them along the way, right? Because that's not easy. And every little victory is a win. And the biggest thing is just listen. You know, if you don't know the answers, just listen, because people are going to tell you their story. And if you listen and you just allow them to talk, a lot of times they're going to tell you exactly what they're wanting you to know, exactly what they think you need to hear, and about their trauma, and about why they want to get sober, and why they started using or drinking in the first place. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters this morning. I'm actually going to invite them all back now to join me as a bit of a panelist group as we work through some of your questions, some of which we've received throughout the presentation in our chat, and a few in QA. Many of which in QA we've already addressed, but any that we haven't, we will spend some time now to go through those. Please feel free to put those in the QA. That'll be easier for us to see than in the flurry of chats that are going by. Speakers, I hope you've had a chance to look through some of the chats. Very positive feedback throughout the morning to each of you for your respective sections. I do want to start with going back to our first speakers, that is Jason and Breanne. We have a question for you about you spoke about the concept of collectivism among the culture of military personnel. Can you speak more to how that collectivism can operate in a therapeutic treatment community? I'm sure that can have some benefits sometimes, but does it sometimes present some challenges when you're working with your group of military folks there in Madison?
Yeah, and so the collectivism, when you put
Jason, if it's just a little hard to hear you, if we can get you a little more centered
there
on
you
the
go.
screen. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Some reason that speaker doesn't go out to the sides. So with the collectivism in the treatment setup, when we have all our veterans working together in a group, you've got this group that can communicate. They share the same values. They share a lot of the same, background. And so it's easier for them to open up and talk, vice than maybe talking with somebody else who didn't serve. And so we see that when a veteran is speaking with another veteran, we tend to see a better outcome. And I know Ms. Bree here, who's working with them every day, she gets to see that once she's actually doing, her treatment stuff with the veterans.
Yeah, and you'll definitely see in a group setting, because I facilitated group with veterans, and I facilitated group with veterans and civilians. So you'll definitely see in a group setting that vets are more open to share, and they are more open to be vulnerable amongst people who understand them. I say all the time, like-minded people know like-minded people, versus them being in a setting with, some civilians, they're kind of a little bit more withdrawn because they don't feel that sense of camaraderie. They don't feel that sense of, they understand me, they get me, they know, how I'm feeling, they know what I go through. So that's why I think it's important that, we stress the importance of our VA program here, because it is a family dynamic among our vets, something that they may not have had prior to coming here. So they do get to come, and they do get to rely on each other and lean on each other and get the support that they probably would not otherwise get.
Lovely. Thank you very much to both of you for your answer. I want to turn to our second speaker, Leah Parker. Thank you for your session on treatment of women. One of the references that you made that had a little bit of chatter in the chat was around one of the references you made, the book by Kevin McCauley, Pleasure Unwoven. Can you provide any additional recommendations for resources about expanding the knowledge of treatment considerations with women?
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I would say Hazelden puts out a lot of really good recovery information in general, but especially focused on women. One of my favorites is A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps. That's by Stephanie Covington. And it really kind of speaks to the differences of how women approach the 12 steps, the needs that are necessary for women in the 12 steps. And I think it's written toward probably the addict and alcoholic, but it's also really helpful for treatment providers, therapists, just to gain that better understanding of treating women. I would also recommend The Recovering Heart. It's about emotional sobriety for women. We all know that, if you're in the world of addiction at all, after the big book toward the end of Bill W.'s life, he started talking about emotional sobriety, not just physical sobriety. And so this book focuses on emotional sobriety for women, and that is by Beverly Conyers. And a third recommendation I would make would be A Woman's Guide to Recovery, and that is by Brenda Illiff, I believe is her last name and how you pronounce it. It's Iliff, I believe. And so those are three really great resources I would check out if you're wanting to deepen your understanding of women in recovery, and specifically focused on, a lot of that's focused on 12 steps too. So.
Fantastic. Excellent resources. Appreciate that. Want to acknowledge Angel. Thank you so much for participating in this, being our last speaker. Being the last speaker always has a little bit of a rush to it because you're extra mindful of the time, and it's a tough chair to be in. I appreciate you doing so well with it. We have it's a question in the Q&A here for you in particular when working with population you're serving in the LGBTQIA population. We know one of the principles of recovery is keeping things simple. So, with this population, when you're dealing with so much chaos, not only with substance use, mental illness, but even addressing the family issues and their personal development and their identity, they can be in such upheaval when they start working with you, which you referenced throughout the presentation. What tools or resources do you direct your folks back to for keeping it simple, to use that phrase?
No, I do think that's a good question. It can seem really chaotic because the family dynamics can be, and just in general, but you see that across anybody who steps into treatment. So keeping it simple. So I would argue that treatment in some ways doesn't change, right? We're going to still have conversations about sobriety. We're going to have conversations about support. We're going to talk about, the 12 steps, those kind of things. Those things day in, day out, you do keep it simple. The complicated things that we kind of talk about are more in how are we treating the patient? Are we just showing how we show respect, how we show and most of it's listening. And so with that, like keeping it simple, treatment doesn't change as far as like what we're talking about day in, day out. It's just looking at and making sure that we're being respectful across the board. That's where it can kind of feel complicated, especially when we're looking at families. But if you look at families of anybody in addiction, like it's complicated. So I would say the treatment, day in, day out doesn't change. You're just looking at being respectful for pronouns and, stigmatization and discrimination, but you're also looking at that for all different types of people that are in treatment.
Very, very, very good point. I want to stay with you for just a minute. I referenced something in your bio introduction that I wanted to go back and give a little extra spotlight to in the work that you're doing in your current role, the support group for those who have had family and peers who have been victims of homicide. Can you talk a little bit about the services you provide? I'd like to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, no, it is a very cool program. So I work with the Homicide Survivors program here, and it is free resources. So anybody who is in basically the top half of Alabama has access to this resources. And honestly, even if you don't, if you look around somebody, because it's grant-based, there's a lot of different programs out there amongst the nationally, but basically anybody who has somebody who died of homicide. So it could be family, it could be friends, it could be teachers, it could be anybody who has somebody that died from homicide. We have support groups that we meet on the last Tuesday of the month. Those are free. We have free individual counseling. So you can come, you can sign up. We also give, there's forms that you have to fill out as far as legal forms. And then there's compensation forms that you can get as part of victim services. So we provide a wide variety of resources and options. We do things actually October 1st in Big Spring Park. We're doing a vigil from 5 to 7 p.m. And that anybody and everybody can come to that. But we do all kinds of support and things to help people remember, because a lot of times, especially as time goes on, people feel like their loved ones are not being remembered, and that's hard. Plus, there's a lot of complicated, sometimes there's complicated issues around grief, especially with homicide. There can be a lot of complications. We also do, and that's for kids and adults. So I work with kids and adults, that have a loved one that has died from homicide. And if you are looking at the stats, they're just getting bigger and bigger in our area. And even just a month ago, we had 3 in a week, you know, so it's getting larger. But these are free services with the Family Service Center that are open to anybody.
Is there a family service center? That's the key. Huntsville Family Service Center. Is there a website that you could direct people to?
Yes, it is.
I put her up. Sorry, everybody put her on the spot.
You're good.
Well, she looks that up and she'll put it in the chat. You know, this is just the evidence of we are a community of providers. You know, many of our speakers, the majority of our speakers we've had here today are current Bradford employees. Angel has been a long-term Bradford employee, but has now gone off to this opportunity. We always like to bring people back because we are continuing to expand our reach as a community that all ties back to the root of treating mental illness and substance use disorder. We've put throughout the training information in the chat on how to do your continuing education. You can do that link right now if you want to grab it. Angel just put into the chat there the Family Services Center of Huntsville website. Thank you for that. If you'd like to go ahead and do your eval, you can grab that in the chat before we close out. But in case you miss it, we are going to be sending you an email to the email address for which you used to register. You're going to get that evaluation link. You'll also get copies of the materials from today, including a link for the recording of this training. If you don't do the survey immediately today, please do it as soon as you can. Give us about 2 weeks to get it back to you. If you do not do the survey within 30 days, you will not be eligible for continuing education for this session. Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our presenters. Thanks for everybody for playing along at home. It has been another great event from Bradford, and that's just my humble opinion. Join us for our next one in December when we'll be talking about even more issues that will bring value to you in the work that you do with others. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.